Chapter 1377. I heard that he hasn't been able to let go of your sister, right? Why don't you give up on him? Dong Xinxin looked at Lin Wenwen's happy face speechlessly. He always felt that this girl was a little silly when it came to love. For a man who had someone in his heart, and a loyal one at that. The possibility was almost less than 1%, right? At this time, she could either let go of him, and let herself give up slowly. Or she could help him get the person he liked, and let herself give up. How could there be someone who would silently sacrifice for him behind his back? To put it nicely, she was hell-bent on loving the other party without asking for anything in return. To put it bluntly, it was a bit of self-torture. She was a woman of the new era, and she wasn't as old-fashioned as the ancient times. Why would she let herself fall deeper and deeper? Long Qingying, who had just returned, stood quietly by the window. She heard Dong Xinxin's words and half of her heart agreed with him. But the other half also hoped that Yuan Tianqing would give up on their leader and look back at Lin Wenwen. Now, Yuan Tianqing had indeed let go of Lin Qiao. So what if he didn't let go? She was already the mother of someone else's child. Although this made Lin Wenwen's hope a little higher. But when it came to love, it really couldn't be forced. If Yuan Tianqing didn't have feelings for her, then there was nothing she could do. Hearing this, Lin Wenwen just smiled faintly. Actually, to be honest, I have already let go of him a little. I'm not as stubborn as before, but after all, he is the man I fell in love with. It's hard to love someone, but it's even harder to let go of someone you love. Xinxin, you don't have anyone you like now, so you may not be able to understand this kind of uncontrollable desire to care for him and pay attention to his feelings. After experiencing Lin Qiao's death and the destruction of Pluto's base, she no longer put Yuan Tianqing in the first place. But he still occupied an important position in her heart, and it couldn't be erased. Dong Xinxin couldn't help but look at Long Qingying, then looked at Lin Wenwen and asked her, "But won't you feel tired? Loving someone also requires energy and motivation. What is your motivation? Waiting for him to fall in love with you one day?" After saying that, he sighed in disappointment and continued, "This hope is too slim. This kind of man is the most difficult to deal with. You're so silly. There were so many men here, and there was no lack of good ones. Why did he have to like someone with such a small possibility? You should at least find a man who doesn't have anyone he likes in his heart, right? Why not? How is my brother? My brother's character and ability are very good, and he hasn't met anyone he likes yet. I think he seems to be a little interested in you." As she spoke, she actually started to pull strings for Dong Lijia. Lin Wenwen's face instantly darkened. He looked at her speechlessly. "What the hell? Your brother is younger than me. I don't like men younger than me." Long Qingying also looked at Dong Xinxin in surprise and blinked her eyes. Dong Xinxin immediately became excited. He stretched out his finger to introduce his brother's merits to her. "What? My brother is also very mature. Besides, you're not that much younger, okay? He was only 1 year old. This could be ignored. People even said that a woman in her 3rd year would hug a golden brick. Why isn't my brother 3 years younger than you? Besides, my brother isn't any worse than Deputy Leader Yuan. He's very capable. After all, he's the leader of a top-notch corpse hunting group." Before she finished counting, Lin Wenwen interrupted. "He's just one of the leaders." As soon as Dong Xinxin was interrupted by her, he immediately glared at her gloomily. "Can you not interrupt? Besides, my brother's physique is not worse than Deputy Leader Yuan's, and his character is not bad either." After these few years of experience, Dong Lijia was no longer the little fresh meat that Lin Wenwen had seen before. Other than becoming a fox, his physique was also much stronger, and his height was not much different. He was considered a very good man, except for Lin Wenwen. His looks are a little lacking. Dong Xinxin almost vomited blood because she couldn't refute this. Yuan Tianqing was indeed much more handsome than Dong Lijia. They weren't on the same level in terms of looks. Although he's not as handsome as Deputy Leader Yuan, my brother isn't bad either. In the end, she could only force out this sentence, but her tone wasn't as firm as before. Lin Wenwen looked at her speechlessly. "Liking someone doesn't depend on their looks, and I'm not a good-looking person. Even if your brother is more handsome than brother Tianxing, I won't like him. Dong Xinxin immediately said. Don't say that first. Feelings need to be cultivated. You can try it out first. As she spoke, she gave a deceptive look, and she looked more and more like a matchmaker. Lin Wenwen looked at her angrily and said, all right. Are you one of those gossipy women in the countryside? Don't try to set people up all the time. Dong Xinxin looked at her helplessly and said, what can I do? My brother has high standards. Even if he's not anxious, I'm anxious for him. I still want to hug a little nephew or niece. Also, I'm thinking for you. Who asked you to keep staring at a piece of meat that you can't bite? Just as they were talking about this matter, Lin Xiao suddenly thought of her, and Yuan Tianxing, after she finished talking about Lin Feng's operation to catch the mole. Alright. When one doesn't have any missions outside recently, why don't we let her help Tianxing look at the information? Duan Wan looked at her amusedly. You're very active in matchmaking them. Aren't you afraid of making the deputy leader sad? In any case, he liked her. But she kept thinking of pushing him into her younger sister's arms. Lin Xiao sighed and said, if it was in the past, of course I wouldn't do this, but it's different now. Since he's decided to give up, I might as well give him a push. I can fulfill Wenwen's wish. Isn't this the best of both worlds? Lin Wenwen had always liked Yuan Tianxing, and it just so happened that Yuan Tianxing had made up his mind to give up on her. Wasn't this a good opportunity? Although she couldn't be too impatient, she still had to create some opportunities for them. Therefore, Lin Feng wanted to matchmake Dong Xinxin with Lin Hao, while Dong Xinxin wanted to matchmake Lin Wenwen with Dong Lijia. When it came to Lin Xiao, she wanted to matchmake Yuan Tianxing with Lin Wenwen. Inexplicably, she felt that there was a bit of an awkward coincidence. Duan Wan thought about it and nodded. That's true. But if he really gets together with Wenwen, won't the two of you be very awkward? After all, their past relationship was a bit complicated. Lin Xiao said calmly. No. Actually, don't think that Tianxing and Wenwen are single-minded people. They're actually very straightforward. As long as they really let go, then they won't have any thoughts of being together anymore. Chapter 1378. She had planned to send the news to Haicheng, but she heard that Wu Qinghua was in her base. Lin Xiao immediately saved herself the trouble of sending someone to deliver the news to him. After sorting out the meeting materials for the next day's meeting, Lin Xiao went back home. Before she entered the house, she saw that the door of her house was already open. Two little radishes stuck their heads out and looked around. It seemed that they were waiting for her to come back. Lin Xiao looked at the two of them and felt warmth in her heart. You two sensed my return so quickly. After seeing Lin Xiao come out, Wu Yueling, who was leaning against the door with Tungting in her arms, stretched out her head, and her eyes lit up. After hearing her words, she immediately nodded. Mama, Mama. The two children called out to Lin Xiao at the same time. Tungting's voice was loud and clear, and it somewhat covered Wu Yueling's weak voice. However, Lin Xiao heard it clearly. After being called out like that, the warmth in her heart melted. It was like a pet at home waiting for her to come home. Especially when it saw that she was back, it would call out coquettishly. She walked over and bent over to pick up Tungting from Wu Yueling's arms. Then, she walked in holding Wu Yueling's hand. She looked at Wu Yueling with some surprise. This child had just called her Mama. She didn't know if it was because of Tungting's influence, or perhaps it was because he really treated her as his mother. She could feel that when Lingling called her, although her feelings were very pure, they were actually a little complicated. It didn't seem like a real Oedipus complex, but it felt like she was very dependent on her. After entering, she saw Wu Qinghua sitting on the sofa in her house. This man was wearing home clothes, and he looked so relaxed as if he was in his own home. Wu Qinghua was reading official documents when he sensed her coming in. He looked up with a smile and glanced at her, before lowering his head to continue reading. However, he said, Tungting said he smelled your scent a long time ago. But why are you back so early? After Lin Xiao placed the two children on the sofa, she took off her coat and threw it to the side. He sat on the single-seater sofa and said, I think I know why these underworld creatures appeared. But now there's another problem I need to investigate. It just so happens that when I came out, I went to China to gather some information. I'll write you a proposal later. Remember to read it. The proposal that she wanted to write was the one that she had seen at Sikong Chen's place. Her brain was very good now. His memory was also very strong. He basically had a photographic memory. Therefore, she could write out a copy of what she had seen at that time. Hearing what she said, Wu Qingyue felt that the plan she mentioned was not simple. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at her. What did you find out? Lin Xiao said. Of course it's Sikong Chen's plan. Do you think I'm just going to take a look? Wu Qingyue immediately became spirited. His eyes slightly widened as he asked her. What's wrong? Did you figure out all of his plans? He felt that if this female zombie made a move now, then she would definitely get the answer she wanted to know. After all, there was no one who could break through her invisibility skill, right? Lin Xiao nodded indifferently and said, I got it. Their first plan to deal with High City has already begun to be secretly arranged. It will officially start after 10 days. Guess what his first step is to do to you guys? After saying that, she looked at him. Wu Qingyue narrowed his eyes and smiled as he looked into her eyes. Then he said, with Sikong Chen's methods of never using open schemes, it must be something like a biological weapon, right? Poison? Lin Xiao nodded. That's right. You know him quite well. But you probably didn't guess his entire plan this time. He didn't come up with it alone. There was another collaborator. But there's no more of that now. His first step was to transmit a new virus developed from the blood of zombies into your base. I'll give you a list later. These are all the people in your base. They have these new viruses in their hands. Their plan is to use the most direct method to spread the virus in your base and infect the survivors and soldiers in your base. Moreover, the underworld creatures that have gathered outside to advance will cause a wave of attacks on the human base after they advance. Her words successfully made the smile on Wu Qingyue's face disappear. His handsome face became expressionless and very serious. He didn't interrupt Lin Xiao, knowing that she wasn't finished. Lin Xiao continued, I estimate that within these 10 days, Sikong Chen will send a large number of people to use some method to lure these underground creatures out of High City. Then he'll wait for you to deal with these underground creatures and secretly spread the virus in your base. This will be a heavy blow to you no matter what. After saying that, she spread her hands and leaned against the sofa to look at Wu Qingyue's expression. Wu Qingyue didn't say anything. He just looked down at the document in his hand expressionlessly. After a few seconds he said, Please give me the plan, thank you. Okay, let me take a shower first. Lin Xiao nodded. She stood up and went into the bedroom. The next morning, Lin Wenwen received a task to help Yuan Tianxing look at research materials. What kind of materials do you need my help with? Lin Wenwen looked at Long Qingying curiously. Long Qingying answered her expressionlessly. Leader destroyed a secret weapon research base in China yesterday and collected a batch of research materials. But the amount of materials is a bit large, so I need people to look at it together. Lin Wenwen said, How much is a bit large? About a few thousand? Long Qingying looked at her with uncertainty. Lin Wenwen fell silent after hearing that. Did her sister just casually bring back the database of others? But if it was only a few thousand, it shouldn't be considered moving the entire database. Long Qingying continued. On the way here yesterday, I asked Deputy Leader Yuan and Deputy Leader Xia to roughly look through it with their people. But I've only made a classification. I haven't looked at the content in detail. They weren't doing scientific research. Even if they wanted to look at the data, they probably wouldn't understand it. It was better to make a classification according to the table of contents first, and then slowly look through it. Speaking of this problem, Lin Wenwen also thought that they were still lacking in talents in this area. We don't seem to have experts in this area in our base. Leng Qingtong and Yan Huiguang are either researching zombies or biology. I don't think anyone can understand weapons, and our base is really short of people in this area. Lin Wenwen frowned. Chapter 1379. In the morning, Lin Xiao held a meeting with the people in charge of the base. Deputy leaders Lin Feng, Yuan Tianxing Xie Dong, Du Yuanxing Chen Yuding, El Mar, Qiu Lili and other captains. There were also special research leaders Leng Xiantong, Lin Hao, and the others. They were all called to the meeting. Lin Xiao placed the copies of Xikong Chun and Professor Bai's plans to deal with Sea City, Universal Base, and other major bases on the table in front of everyone. Xikong Chun led the underground creatures to attack the survivor bases. Sea City and Universal Base weren't the only targets. Even Black Dragon Base, Qingshan Base, and Meng Clan weren't spared. He wanted all the bases except Wuxia to be attacked by these underground creatures. Everyone wore their uniforms for the official meeting. Lin Hao and Leng Xiantong wore a doctor's robe and a researcher's uniform respectively. Both of them wore white uniforms. As for the others, they were all in military uniforms. Everyone on the side of the first base was in military green, while those on the side of the second base were in black. The style, epaulets, and color of the military uniforms varied according to their ranks. Everyone placed their hats at the side and sat in their seats. Lin Xiao said to everyone, "The proposal in your hands is the blueprint that I saw in Xikong Chen's office. When I went to look for him, it was also a coincidence. He was looking at the content of the proposal and seemed to be in a hurry to take the first step." While she was speaking, everyone flipped through the documents in front of them. We're going to talk about 3 things today. The first is the situation of the underground space and the underground creatures. I've written the situation and data of the underground space into the document in your hands. The second is Xikong Chen's proposal. We have to think of ways to deal with all of Xikong Chen's plans in advance. The third is the research documents that I brought back. We have to finish reading them as soon as possible and figure out the hidden information in them. Lin Xiao placed her elbows on both sides of the table. She clasped her hands and glanced at everyone before speaking. She continued, "As for the reason for the sudden emergence of the underground creatures, I've already asked Li Zheng to bring the news to you. Now, I'm telling you that there's a level 9 underground creature in the underground space. No one on land can resist its power. Even Dong Xiaowei of the Qingshan base couldn't do it. It was the one who gave the order for the creatures in the underground space to rush out. If it comes out one day, it won't be good news." Lin Feng couldn't help but frown and ask, "So why did it suddenly chase these creatures to the surface? Could it be that the underground space they originally lived in is no longer suitable for them to live in?" Hearing his question, the others also looked at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao thought for a moment before replying, "Based on my observation of the situation underground, the conditions are very poor. Not only that, there were basically no herbivores, only carnivorous exotic beasts were left. They did not eat the plants in the underground space. Instead, they devoured each other. This didn't affect the high-level creatures, but it wasn't good for the low-level creatures. It was very difficult for these low-level beasts to find food underground. If they ate each other like this, there would come a day when the exotic beasts in this underground space would go extinct. I don't know if that level 9 exotic beast realized this and sent all those low-level exotic beasts to come up from below. No wonder almost none of the underground creatures that gathered to devour each other to advance were below level 3. Is that so?" Lin Feng revealed a pensive expression. "Based on the current situation, these underground creatures aren't our main problem anymore. At least we still have catnip and a fruit I picked from underground. At least we can deal with 1 or 2 waves of these underground creatures for the time being. Also, that level 9 fellow shouldn't be climbing out so soon. There's no need to worry about that for now. The most important thing is to find out what clues Xikong Chun used to lead these creatures to the outside of our base. The second thing is Xikong Chen's overall plan. So, the answer to the first point can only be found in the second or third point. The first step of Xikong Chen's plan was originally about a dozen days away, but it's uncertain now. I destroyed one of his important secret weapons bases. If I anger him, the deadline of a dozen days is no longer certain. Perhaps he'll explode in anger and give the order to take action right now. It's just that Xikong Chen's first step is to deal with Haicheng. In order to deal with Haicheng and the other bases at the same time, he used this method. However, I've already told Wu Qingyue about the situation in Haicheng. He'll take care of it when he gets back." She also flipped open the document in front of her and said seriously to everyone, Everyone used the fastest speed to finish reading the plan. When they saw that Sikongchen was actually using the zombie virus as a biological weapon to secretly attack all the survivors in Haicheng, they couldn't help but frown. Is he crazy? He's actually harming other people's bases for the sake of his own base? In his eyes, the survivors from the other bases aren't even human, right? Qiu Lily was the first to blurt out. In his eyes. He doesn't even care about humans who have no value to him. I really don't know how he became the leader of Wuxia's base. Could it be that he only relied on martial arts? Elmar also followed up Qiu Lily's words. Lin Xiao glanced at her and said, "What Meng Meng said is right. Sikongchen indeed relied on martial arts to control the entire Wuxia. This isn't strange at all. It was impossible to control 2 million people without martial arts. The so-called coercion and temptation, the word coercion was the most important. Only when there was a threat would there be coercion. At the back, some benefits and temptation would be added as support. Other than these two girls, everyone else was calm about this point. After all, this was something that everyone had already guessed. Lin Feng was concerned about whether Haicheng could deal with the virus that Sikongchen had released. After all, the original virus had already entered Haicheng. He looked up at Lin Xiao and asked, "Is Wu Qingyue all right?" Lin Xiao glanced at him and said, "I gave him a list of the people who carried this batch of virus. If he still can't solve it with this, I'll give it to him. If he still can't deal with it, then it seems that I'm blind." "There's a list? Then there shouldn't be any problems." Lin Feng shrugged and didn't ask her anymore. Chapter 1380. With regards to the information I brought back, Deputy Leader Yuan is now in charge of looking through it. The purpose of your search is to find out the research information on the underground creatures. The second is to see if they did any experiments or tests in the underground a few years ago. I suspect that the underground environment becoming like that may have something to do with their exploration a few years ago. After explaining the previous matters, Lin Xiao began to discuss the purpose of bringing back the information. She retracted her hand, crossed her arms in front of her chest, and leaned back against the chair. She looked at Yuan Tianqing and said, "But we don't have an expert in this area, so I'll have to trouble Deputy Leader Yuan to spend more effort to understand these two matters. But seeing that your physical condition isn't good, and it just so happens that Lin Wenwen doesn't have any missions recently, let her join in to assist you and reduce your burden." In fact, Yan Huiguang's ability could be of great help to Yuan Tianqing. But considering that Longhair hadn't joined their base for a long time, his credibility in the base wasn't enough for him to take on this task. Lin Xiao didn't intend to let him join in this work. When Yuan Tianqing heard this, he couldn't help but look up at her. He then turned to look at Lin Wenwen, who was sitting below, with an expression of wanting to say something but hesitating. But in the end he didn't say it, because Lin Xiao's words had already indicated that this matter had been decided. Any objections would be rejected. As soon as Lin Wenwen heard his name mentioned, he responded, "Yes. Xiedong, you're still in charge of finding out the gathering place of the mutated beasts. First find the traces of the people Sikongchen sent to guide the underground creatures, and then figure out what they plan to do." After arranging for Yuan Tianqing, Lin Xiao turned to give instructions to Xiedong. Xiedong nodded indifferently, "Yes." Lin Xiao then looked at Lin Feng. "Lin Feng, set up a communication channel with Sea City. If they have any news, let me know immediately." "Understood." Lin Feng nodded. At this time, Wu Qingyue, who had rushed back to Sea City early in the morning, immediately called everyone for a meeting. Wu Qingyue sat at the head of the table with a smile, while Xiao Yunlong and Zhou Shihui sat expressionlessly on both sides. He glanced at the crowd with a smile, and everyone looked at him quietly. "The leader of Universal Life Base has brought us an urgent message. Our base's defense is still not done well. Something bad has been brought into our base. If these things are used in our base, it will be a terrible disaster for our base." Wu Qingyue still had a faint smile on his face as he spoke, but his eyes were as cold as a sharp sword. Everyone felt the pressure in the conference hall suddenly drop, and the air was so quiet that they could hear a pin drop. After saying that, Wu Qingyue didn't say anything else. He continued to smile as he looked at the crowd. Xiao Yunlong looked left and right, leaning his tall upper body back. He put one hand on the table and knocked his knuckles on it. His face was expressionless, but his eyes also turned cold. Well, I've just received the news. We've been strengthening our defenses, but no matter how strict we are, we still have to guard against fire, theft, and spies. It's just that it's really difficult to guard against a stab in the back by our own people. What I didn't expect was that in the list of spies, there are our own people. The faces of the people sitting below immediately changed slightly, and most people's eyes began to wander. Then they saw that among the people present in the conference room, there were people whose faces turned pale, and their eyes flickered with panic. What are you panicking about? Your faces are really ugly, and your eyes are also panicked. Are you telling us that the spies are you? Zhou Shihui's face was also expressionless, but his observation was very strong. As soon as his words came out, those people whose faces had turned unnatural just now, their faces became even uglier, and their eyes even froze for a moment. And when the others saw their expressions, they immediately shot daggers at them one by one. Xiao Liqing stood up, staring at Li Yushan in disbelief, and couldn't help asking, "Why? What's your reason?" As a member of the intelligence team in Sea City Base, and the captain of the intelligence team, who followed Wu Qingyue, Li Yushan, it was more suitable for him to hide the information, or create fake information. What everyone couldn't figure out was what was his reason for doing this. Did Sea City not treat him well? Did they not treat him well? Li Yushan's tough face was also very pale, but there was no panic in his eyes. Instead, he seemed to be in a daze, as if he was relieved. After hearing Xiao Liqing's question, he raised his head to look at him, and then at Wu Qingyue, and the other two sitting in the upper seats. Wu Qingyue also looked at him. He didn't expect that the people around him would betray the base. From his understanding of Li Yushan had no reason to do this. So he also wanted to know what was going on with Xiao Liqing's question. What made this subordinate, who had followed him for 7 years, choose to betray him? Li Yushan sat in the same place without moving. After looking at Xiao Liqing and then at Wu Qingyue, he lowered his head and remained silent. Are you going to keep silent like this? Xiao Liqing looked at him and frowned. While they were talking, a large number of soldiers had already poured in from outside the door. Under everyone's gazes, they raised their guns and pointed at the pale and lifeless people. They were all waiting for Wu Qingyue's orders. As long as he nodded, they would immediately take the people away. Xiao Liqing's questioning didn't make Li Yushan say anything. Seeing that he didn't have any reaction, Xiao Liqing couldn't help but turn to look at Wu Qingyue. Wu Qingyue stared at Li Yushan, and finally put away the smile on his face. He said to him solemnly, "Based on your conscience, don't you have anything to say? At least let me know what your reason is. Is it that hard to say it?" He could also investigate, but he wanted Li Yushan to say it himself. Slap. Say it. If you're a man, say it. Li Yushan. Xiao Liqing couldn't help but slap the table and shout at Li Yushan. To be honest, Xiao Liqing was rarely this agitated, but he had always treated Li Yushan as a brother with feelings. If he didn't have feelings, he wouldn't feel so bad. Li Yushan slowly raised his head and looked at him. His eyes were filled with sorrow as he said, "What do you want to say? Is there any use in saying this now?" Xiao Liqing. Chapter 1381. Then wait until you want to say it. I'll give you a chance. Wu Qingyue said to Li Yushan at this time, then waved his finger at the soldiers standing behind Li Yushan. The soldiers understood and went forward to pull Li Yushan up. They grabbed both of his arms and escorted him out of the conference room. After a moment of commotion, there were a few fewer people in the conference room. The atmosphere was even more oppressive than before. Wu Qingyue knocked on the table and said, "Okay, now the people who should leave have left. Then in addition to the few people just now, there is a list of a group of people here. Look at the documents in front of you. They all have a new zombie virus developed by China. We can't let these viruses spread. This new virus can not only avoid the detection of ordinary detection equipment, but it will also turn humans into zombies within 3 seconds, and directly into level 3 zombies. If a bunch of level 3 zombies were running around in the base, you can imagine what kind of scene it would be. Old Xiao, I'll leave this list to you, go now. Xiao Yunlong immediately stood up, took the documents in his hand, and turned to leave with his subordinate Huang Ming. Xikong Chen actually went to this extent to deal with our base. He really has no bottom line. If this goes on, if we lose to him, then will all the bases in the country be controlled by him in the future? If this goes on, when will the hope of survival of our human race come out? Zhou Shihui's face was sullen, his voice was very dissatisfied. In his heart, the most important thing is not the development of human beings, but the benefits that everyone can give him now, as well as to satisfy his strange ambition to control. Wu Qingyue smiled faintly. Then he continued. In addition to the plan for this operation in our base, he also made a move on the underground creatures below. He wants to lead these things outside all the bases in our country, not just against us. Zhou Shihui looked at the documents in front of him and asked with some confusion. Wu Qingyue glanced at him and reminded him. You just said, he wants to control the existing bases in the country. He definitely doesn't just want to deal with us. You forgot, he used the bombs to deal with those underground creatures. If the major bases don't have the ability to resist when facing these underground creatures, isn't this the opportunity for Xikong Chen to subdue them? Zhou Shihui's face turned ugly, and he continued. So this opportunity was actually created by him. And, it's good that you understand. Wu Qingyue nodded to him. Zhou Shihui suddenly turned to look at him and asked, since there are no movements from the underground creatures outside, does it mean that he hasn't started to make a move? Wu Qingyue nodded and said with a smile, he hasn't started to make a move, but I think he will make a move soon. Zhou Shihui looked at his confident look and asked in confusion, why? Wu said with to say, because he am angry. If he's angry, he'll definitely act in advance. His words, he will be to make a move. It was obvious that something had happened here. Otherwise, why would Xikong Chen get angry for no reason at all? When Zhou Shihui heard that Xikong Chen was about to get angry, he immediately became interested. What's going on? Oh, did the leader of the base cause trouble again? That female zombie's ability to cause trouble wasn't small at all. Also, she was the one who brought the news back, so she definitely wouldn't just do nothing and just bring the news back. You know her quite well. Wu Qingyue glanced at him with a smile and continued. That's right, she's stirring up trouble again. She blew up a very important secret weapon base of Xikong Chen and stole all of his research materials. After listening to what he said, everyone smiled in understanding. Sure enough, Wu Qingyue's answer didn't disappoint them. One must know that Xikong Chen was most proud of his weapons and technology. For such a secret weapon base to be blown up, it would be strange if he didn't die from anger. Wu Qingyue used the word very important, which meant that it was really important to Xikong Chen. Everyone couldn't help but say, good job. So, other than dealing with the mole in our base, we need to quickly go to the place where the underground creatures are gathered to investigate the movements in China. We need to see what they are planning to use to lure these creatures to the outskirts of our base. At the same time, we need to pass on Xikong Chen's plan to the base as soon as possible. Wu Qingyue looked at them and said. After the meeting, Wu Qingyue walked out of the conference room and put away the smile on his face. As he walked, he said to Xiao Liqing, find a way to ask Li Yushan what's going on. From his reaction today, it doesn't seem like it was voluntary. He couldn't be happy about being betrayed by his subordinates. Understood. I'll ask Emoli to find him. Xiao Liqing nodded. Emoli was a level 5 psychic, although Li Yushan was also a level 5 natural. But in a situation where he couldn't use his ability, he couldn't withstand Emoli's psychic attack. Now, not only did China develop a drug to suppress the ability of a psychic, Haiqing had also developed a drug with the same effect by analyzing the drug. Therefore, there was no need to worry about the psychic's ability attacking them. Therefore, under the effect of this drug, Li Yushan's ability couldn't affect Emoli. He could only let Emoli do whatever she wanted to him. When Emoli, who was a psychiatrist in the medical center, received the news, she looked at Xiao Liqing in surprise. How could it be Li Yushan? Why, Xiao Liqing looked at her helplessly. I also want to know why, but he refused to tell us. Isn't this why I'm asking you to help me find out the reason? The leader said that Li Yushan might not have done it voluntarily. Could it be that the people in China caught hold of him and forced him to do it? According to the Li Yushan I know, he shouldn't have done such a thing. But since he did it, it means that the reason must be very important to him. Emily nodded. I understand. I'll go take a look now. After saying that, she tidied up the things on her desk, stood up and walked out. After the results are out, send the report directly to the leader. I still have other things to do. Thank you for your hard work. Xiao Liqing smiled at her and followed her out of the office. After leaving the medical center, he prepared to bring people to investigate Xikong Chen's action plan against the underground creatures. Chapter 1382. Emily went to the place where Li Yueshan was imprisoned and looked at Li Yueshan. He sat on the only bed in the room with his head down, hugging his legs and curling up into a ball. Emily stood outside the door and observed Li Yueshan through the glass window. She turned and nodded to the guard next to her. The guard opened the door with the key and let Emily in. Li Yueshan's head moved slightly when he felt someone come in. He didn't look up and didn't see who came in, but he already knew who it was just from the aura. After Emily came in, the guard closed the door again. Say it, I hope you can say it yourself. I don't want to use my ability on you. She stood not far from the door and looked at Li Yueshan. Looking at their past relationship, Emily Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing all hoped that he would say the reason himself. This was also a form of respect for him. There's nothing to say. I'll accept whatever you want to do to me. Li Yueshan said in a low voice. His voice was weak and had a sense of desolation. Emily looked at him silently for a while before continuing. Is there something you did in China that we don't know? Li Yueshan was silent. Emily looked at him and continued. I know that you definitely wouldn't take the initiative to do such a thing to High City. Tell me what's going on. I think you don't want me to use my ability on you. Li Yueshan slowly turned his head to look at her. Then his whole body unfolded and was no longer curled up into a ball. He turned around and faced Emily. His back was against the wall, and his legs were crossed on the bed. He leaned against the wall and said indifferently to Emily, Anyway, my identity has been exposed, and the plan is known to you. The survivors in High City have escaped this disaster. What else is there to say? Is my reason that important? Emily stared at him angrily. Do you want to die so badly? He knew that they were asking for his reason, and that they wanted to deal with him based on the severity of the situation. But this person refused to fall for it. Did he want them to deal with him directly? Right now, because the virus has not been successfully spread, if Li Yueshan didn't do it willingly, then they would choose to punish him in a more reasonable way. After all, there was a huge difference between being forced and taking the initiative. The effects of both were different. If Li Yueshan was willing to do this, then he wouldn't be so calm now. Emily stood there with her hands in the pockets of her robe. She looked at him calmly and asked, But according to the investigation, while you were hiding their plan, you didn't do anything else, right? Don't tell me that what they asked you to do was to conceal their information? Li Yueshan leaned against the wall and looked at her with his chin slightly raised. He suddenly sneered and said, Isn't this enough? As an intelligence officer, he knew the importance of information. It was because he had concealed the information about these viruses and allowed them to enter the Sea City base. As long as these things were thrown into the food or water, or even broken in the crowd, they would spread into the air. It could cause a large number of people to turn into zombies. The consequences would be dire. But you didn't help them cover up, did you? In fact, in your heart, you still think that it's best to let others find out about them, right? Emily immediately saw through his real thoughts under the sneer. Covering up and hiding had different natures in different situations. Covering up was to actively use other things to divert other people's attention, or to use other things to cover the original thing, so that others couldn't see it. Concealment was to not let others know about this matter when one knew about it, or when others asked about it, to say that they didn't know. So the first type was more active, and the second was more passive. But at least Li Yueshan didn't do anything to help them cover up. He just ignored their existence. But in his heart, he actually hoped that someone would find out about it. Because as long as he didn't say it, then what others found out had nothing to do with him. Although Emily didn't use her ability on him, she could guess his thoughts from his expression and eyes, combined with his previous behavior. Li Yueshan looked at her and became silent. Emily also became silent. The air suddenly became quiet, and the two quietly looked at each other. After a while, Li Yueshan moved his eyes away and looked at the corner. He looked at the corner and muttered, "My brother is in their hands." Emily looked at him in surprise and asked, "Huh? Your brother? Isn't he dead?" Li Yueshan said to her, "At that time, I thought he was dead. But now, although he's not dead, it's better to be dead." Emily's white face frowned and asked, "What do you mean? I remember that your brother was thrown into a zombie horde, right? And it's been a few years now. He should have become a zombie long ago." Li Yueshan shook his head. "No, he was lucky that he wasn't bitten by a zombie, so he didn't get infected by the zombie virus. But he was caught by a mutant plant and was almost sucked dry. Fortunately, a group of people passed by and saved him, but he was poisoned by the mutant plant and didn't wake up. Later, he was sent to Wuxia as a research subject and was handed over to Huaxia's research institute." On Emily's originally expressionless face, a thoughtful look appeared in her eyes as she asked, "The other party found you? This matter must have been found by the other party first." After all, Li Yueshan had long thought that his brother was dead, so he wouldn't look for his brother. Now that he knew that his brother was still alive, it must have been the other party who found him first. After all, his brother had become the research subject of the other party, and China would definitely investigate his brother's identity. It wouldn't be easy to find at the beginning, but as time passed, they would slowly find out. Emily didn't expect him to be Li Yueshan's biological brother. This was good, considering Li Yueshan's position in High City. China immediately used this to threaten Li Yueshan. Unfortunately, Li Yueshan had a good relationship with his little brother. Otherwise, when he knew that his little brother had an accident, he wouldn't have spent a year to slowly kill those people who threw his little brother into the zombies. Emily didn't hear him speak, so she frowned again. "Did you go see your brother?" She knew that if Li Yueshan hadn't personally confirmed his brother's situation, he wouldn't have allowed the other party to bring the virus into High City like this. The other party used his brother to threaten him. Although his brother was now like a vegetable, he was still alive. Chapter 1383. Emily asked him if he went to see his brother, which was a question she already knew the answer to. Li Yueshan continued to look at her in silence. He didn't want to say anything at this time. Besides, it would be like exonerating himself. He didn't want to do that. He had to bear the consequences of his own actions. Emily saw that he was silent and knew that it was about time. Because she already knew what she wanted to know. She also knew why Li Yueshan did this. She looked at him and said, "It seems that you still don't believe in the strength of our base. That's why you complied with the other party's request." Because if he could tell this to Wu Qingyue and use the power of the base to save his brother, then he wouldn't have to be threatened by the other party. Emily turned around and left, leaving Li Yueshan to wait for his punishment. After Wu Qingyue received Emily's report, he revealed an expression, as if he had already guessed it. So his brother isn't dead. No wonder he can be controlled. He knew that his brother was very important to Li Yueshan. With his character, even if he used Li Yueshan's life to threaten him to do this kind of betrayal, he would rather choose the road of death. But if it was his brother's life, even half of it was more important than his own. Because when the apocalypse first came, his brother Li Yueha had saved his life several times. Li Yueshan owed his brother a few lives. Even when his brother was thrown into the zombie horde, it was also because of him that it happened. So in terms of debt, even if Li Yueshan used his own life to exchange for Li Yueshan's, he had to save Li Yueha's life. China was also lucky to have found Li Yueshan's brother. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to turn him into their helper. How should we punish him? Emily stood in front of Wu Qingyue's table and looked at him. Wu Qingyue smiled and said, Punishing him isn't the priority. We have to find a way to save his brother first. After saving him, we can think about how to punish him. Understood. In that case, my mission is complete. There's nothing else for me to do, Emily said calmly before turning around and leaving. Wu Qinghua looked at her report and thought for a moment. He still had to send someone to investigate this Li Yueha before he could take action. On the other hand, Lin Xiao returned to her office after playing for a while. Wu Yiweling and Teng Ting were playing on the sofa in her office. Shen Yuzhen stood outside the door, helping to keep watch. After sensing that Lin Xiao had returned, little Teng Ting sat up straight and stretched its neck to look at her. Wu Yiweling, who was hugging the big gray rabbit, also raised her head to look at Lin Xiao. Looking at the rabbit that had grown a lot, Lin Xiao asked Wu Yiweling speechlessly, "You're always carrying it, isn't it heavy?" This rabbit was already as big as an adult dog. Although its whole body was furry, it couldn't stop its huge body from completely reducing its original cuteness. Wu Yiweling shook her head. "It's not heavy. It's warm. Because it was winter now, it was very cold. And this kind of soft furry animal was the most popular. Also, this gray rabbit was familiar with Wu Yiweling now, so she could hug it freely." At this time, in the Wuxia base, Xikong Chun was sitting in the main seat of the conference room. His face was gloomy, and he stared coldly at the table in front of him. A bunch of leaders sat below him, all of them silent. Some of them didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They just wanted to make their presence felt to the extreme. Anyone could see how gloomy Xikong Chun's expression was right now. One wrong move, and he would be criticized. Everyone knew that Professor Bai's research base was blown up. Although everyone didn't say a word, many people were secretly happy. For example, Lu Jinan. Seeing that Xikong Chun was just sitting there with a gloomy face, Lu Jinan couldn't help but say after sitting for a while, "Sir, are you going to freeze everyone in the conference room to death?" He was the director who was the least afraid of Xikong Chun in the room. Ever since Hu Zhiyong and Han Xiao died, his alliance had lost a lot of people. Now that he knew that Xikong Chun's partner and research expert had been killed, he was very happy. After all, he was also in the scientific research field, and he was Professor Bai's sworn enemy. However, Xikong Chun was more partial to the old man and completely ignored him. Lu Jinan and Hu Zhiyong had been unhappy with the old man for a long time, but now they died happily. As soon as he spoke, the depressing atmosphere in the conference room was suddenly stirred up. Xikong Chun's eyeballs moved as he swept his gaze across the crowd. Then he opened his mouth and said in a deep voice, "Plan Zero, move ahead." Lu Jinan heard this and crossed his hands in front of his chest. Then he leaned back in his chair and asked, "Why? Right now, there are still many underground creatures that haven't advanced. Not many have succeeded, and there are so many level 7 and level 8 creatures guarding there. Can we successfully lure them out?" In short, it wasn't the right time. The effect of doing so wouldn't be good. Xikong Chun looked at him coldly and said, "Didn't you say before that you would act sooner or later? Why do you have an opinion now?" Lu Jinan smiled and said, "Didn't you say before that if we act too early, it will affect the overall effect of our operation? In order to achieve a higher degree of completion of the plan, I naturally have no opinion. Are you sure that making a decision now isn't an impulsive move?" Anyway, no matter what, he was going to disagree with Xikong Chun. Besides, even if Xikong Chun wanted to change his mind, he couldn't act impulsively with the entire base's plan. With such consequences, if they failed, he, as the leader, might not be able to take responsibility for it. Xikong Chun said, "What if our medicine can attract the level 7 and level 8 underground creatures guarding the surroundings to come over? Also, I only said to move ahead, not now. After a few more days, the advancement of the underworld creatures would reach a peak. At that time, we can directly lure them away. As long as those level 8 and level 8 creatures leave, it doesn't matter whether they advance or not." At this time, Wei Haichao suddenly said, "What about the first step of Sea City's plan? Are we going to start it at the same time?" Xikong Chun shook his head. "No. I want to wait for the people of Sea City to fight with those underground creatures. Then we will start the first step of Sea City's plan." While they were fighting fiercely, Wu Qingyue and the other leaders were also focusing their attention on the outside of the city. If an ordinary person suddenly turns into a zombie, then Haiqing will definitely be in a mess. Chapter 1384. Because it will take some time to guide the actions of those underground creatures, we will be ready sooner or later. Xikongchen looked at Wei Haichao and ordered, "You will send people out to make preliminary preparations in 3 days, and then wait for my order to act." Now that Hou Guozhong was unconscious, it was basically Wei Haichao who was Xikongchen's left and right hand. Understood. After the meeting, Wei Haichao left the office building and went to the Army and the Research Institute to assign tasks. Sea City received the news that night, because there were spies not only in Sea City. After Wu Qingyue received the news, he smiled at Xiao Yunlong, who came to his office to discuss matters, and said, "See, I said Xikongchen is angry." Xiao Yunlong sat there, lazily leaning against the back of the sofa. Hearing what he said, he raised his eyebrows and asked, "Huaxia really acted in advance?" Wu Qingyue said, holding the information in his hand. He said that after 3 days, he will send people to the surroundings of those underground creatures, and then wait for Xikongchen's order to start the operation. Xiao Yunlong sat up straight, one hand on his knee, and asked him with some surprise, "Start after 3 days? It seems that Xikongchen has not completely lost his mind in anger." At least this Xikongchen still had the sense to wait until 3 days before taking action, and also wait for his order to start the operation. "Oh yes, when is he going to make a move on our base?" Since the operation outside was about to begin, it would soon be their turn. But Xikongchen still didn't know that the virus drugs that he had secretly sent in had almost been cleaned up by Xiao Yunlong. Although Xiao Yunlong quickly arranged an arrest operation, there were still people who heard the news and ran away. Tonight, Xiao Yunlong came to talk to Wu Qingyue about this matter. He was not sure whether the person who ran away was carrying the virus. Then halfway through the conversation, Wu Qingyue's subordinate sent him this news. Hearing Xiao Yunlong's question, Wu Qingyue looked at the information in his hand. For our operation, he said that he will wait until the underground creatures besiege us, and we are busy dealing with the underground creatures outside before he gives the order to act. In other words, you want to stab us in the back when we can't take care of anything else? Xikongchen's trick is quite old-fashioned, but if he really succeeds, it will be very useful. Xiao Yunlong coldly snorted, frowning as he shamelessly ridiculed Xikongchen. "I will pass the news to Li Cheng and the Universal Base. Hurry up and find the rat that slipped away. He is still in the base. If he spreads the virus, it will be troublesome." Wu Qingyue still had a smile on his mouth, but his eyes were very serious as he said to Xiao Yunlong. Xiao Yunlong immediately stood up, pulled the hem of his clothes, and put on his cap. He nodded and said, "I understand. Don't worry, he won't be able to run until tomorrow morning." With that, he strode out of Wu Qingyue's office. As soon as he walked out and turned a corner, he saw Meng Yu coming out of the elevator. "Hey, I was going to look for you. We've found that person's location." Xiao Yunlong looked at her with some surprise. "How fast? Then let's go and capture him first. We can't let him run away again this time." As he spoke, he pulled Meng Yu back to the elevator. "Don't you need to report to Brother Yu first?" Meng Yu hesitantly glanced at him. Xiao Yunlong said, "No need. I just told him that the rat won't be able to run until tomorrow morning." At this time, in a dark underground passage, a figure shrank in an inconspicuous corner. In the darkness, his expression was somewhat disheveled. His eyes were vigilantly staring at the passage outside, and he was holding a 7-centimeter long glass tube in his hand. Inside the tube was an unknown dark purple liquid. The man tightly held the tube, which was his last life-saving weapon. After squatting in place for a few minutes, he felt that staying here was not the way. Thus, after carefully observing the outside for a while, he quietly moved out. He prepared to move toward the other side of the passage, and continued to look for a safe exit to escape. However, just as he moved out into the second passage, a person suddenly stood at the corner in front of him. The man was startled and abruptly stopped his footsteps. When he turned his head back, He saw two people standing a dozen meters behind him without him knowing when they had appeared. On one side of the man was the dirty sewer river, and on the other side was the wall. Unless he jumped into the dirty river, there was nowhere to escape. Plop, don't come over or I will smash this thing. You should know what this is. And you should also understand how it spreads. The man did not hesitate to jump into the dirty river. The dirty river was not deep. The muddy and smelly water only reached his calf and below his knee. He raised the tube of liquid in his hand, pointed at the several people who suddenly appeared, and nervously shouted at them. Well, if I smash it, you will be the first one to become a zombie. Do you dare? At this time, the man who was blocking the corner slowly approached and calmly said to him. The man really showed a hesitant expression, but in the blink of an eye, he fiercely glared at them and shouted, I don't care. In any case, it's hard to escape death if you catch me. If you don't let me go, then I will perish together with you. Even if I die, I will drag a bunch of you down with me. As long as he smashed the tube of liquid in his hand, the liquid would leak out through the air. Then you can try it. Let me tell you, if you break this tube of liquid, only you will become a zombie. The man calmly said to him, Can't you see that we are wearing protective suits? At this time, one of the two people behind couldn't help but say. The man then realized, these three people were wearing protective suits from head to toe. Moreover, it should be made of special materials, the kind that can't be burned by fire. Therefore, it is impossible for the poisonous gas in the air to invade the human body. And the liquid in his hand, even if it spreads through the air, it still needs to be in contact with skin or breathing, even if it is like this. But it will also spread through the air vent. Even if you don't become zombies, but what about the people on the ground? Do you not care? The man panicked and took 2 steps back in the water and shouted at them. Don't you know, there is a limit to the range of transmission of this virus in the air? Now that the people in this area have been dispersed by us, it is impossible to harm others. The man continued to calmly stab him. Chapter 1385. The person's words successfully stunned the man holding the drug. He didn't expect this situation at all. He naively thought that as long as this drug was broken, it could turn the entire base, and even the people outside the range into zombies. No, impossible. How could there be a range restriction? They didn't say there was such a situation. The man's eyes were somewhat shaken. At this moment, the water under his feet suddenly froze and turned into ice in an instant. The ice spread upward from his feet in the blink of an eye. Before the man could react, he was completely frozen. Huang Ming jumped down from the top of the river opposite the dirty water behind the man and clapped his hands. He was a level 5 ice elemental, while the frozen man was only a level 4 wind elemental. He was completely unable to dissolve Huang Ming's ability, and could only be frozen there like an ice sculpture. Huang Ming walked over from the frozen surface of the river. The frozen man was still holding the vials in his hand. Huang Ming walked to the front and back of the man, and removed the vials from his hand. The virus liquid inside the tube was also frozen into ice cubes, and Huang Ming took out an isolation box, and put it away. After putting the virus in the box and handing it to the others, Huang Ming turned back, and pressed his hand on the ice sculpture again. Just now he only used 50% of the power of the ice to freeze him. It was completely unable to kill him. Now that he confirmed that the virus in his hand was safe, Huang Ming turned his head, and continued to freeze the ice on the man. After pressing his hand on the man's body, the man who was just wrapped in a layer of transparent ice turned white. At the same time, the fear of death could be seen in the man's eyes. Then Huang Ming pushed with his hand. Kacha bang! The ice sculpture directly broke into pieces after falling. The human body inside also broke into pieces, not even blood flowed out. Okay, let's call it a day. Huang Ming walked to the edge of the river, and waved his hand to remove the ice in the river. Even the dismembered body of the man sank into the dirty water, and was washed away. After the 4 people climbed out of the sewer, there was already a group of people waiting for them. When Xiao Yunlong and Meng Yu saw them come out, they asked, How was it? Huang Ming gestured to him that it was done. Xiao Yunlong and the others breathed a sigh of relief, smiling. That's more like it. Where are the things? After Huang Ming came up, he looked at the others behind him. Just then, the people below handed him the box containing the virus. Huang Ming took it and handed it to Xiao Yunlong. Here. But where did the leader get this list? Huang Ming suddenly curiously asked Xiao Yunlong. Xiao Yunlong shrugged his shoulders. His wife gave it to him. As soon as he said that, everyone immediately revealed a look of understanding. Our leader is really lucky to be chosen by others. Why is no one interested in me? She doesn't need to be as beautiful as Leader Lu, nor does she need to be as valiant as her. Just give me an ordinary woman. Huang Ming's handsome face revealed an envious expression. When he talked about women, his eyes shone with a green light, and he almost drooled. Xiao Yunlong snappily slapped the back of his head. Can you do it or not? Put away that wretched expression of yours. Which woman is willing to like you? Huang Ming felt a little pain from being slapped by his big palm. He couldn't help glaring at him with a face of resentment. You are a well-fed man who doesn't know the suffering of a starving man. Have you forgotten the days when you used to chase after our big sister Yu? Being stared at with a face of resentment, Xiao Yunlong smiled proudly. Hey, then you first have to have a goal to chase. Do you have anyone you like now? No way. If you don't, then why are you shouting? Huang Ming was speechless. Well, he really didn't like anyone. Sigh, old Wu, hurry up and bring back your wife. Don't tell me you have to wait for the child to play soy sauce before you can have someone warm your bed? At this time, Xiao Yunlong suddenly sighed helplessly. Xiao Yu next to him glanced at him. Why are you so anxious about other people's matters? Xiao Yunlong glanced at her and did not say a word. On this side, Sea City had finally cleaned up this batch of virus-carrying spies. Over at the All Beings base, Lin Xiao was at home looking at the preliminary research materials that Yuan Tianxing and Lin Wenwen had sorted out. From the pile of materials, they did find some things about the underground creatures, which was the information that Professor Bai had brought people down to investigate a few years ago. However, the situation that Professor Bai had inquired at that time was indeed different from what Lin Xiao was seeing now. Little Tung Tung, who was crawling around next to her, saw her staring at the information in her hand and frowning. He couldn't help but ask, Mama, did you see anything? Lin Xiao turned to look at Little Tung Tung and suddenly asked him, Little Tung Tung, do you know why these underground spaces have become like this? Little Tung Tung looked at her blankly. How would I know? I'm not a god. Lin Xiao stared at his short figure and looked up and down. Then you seem to know my things very well. I don't even know what's going on myself. Little Tung Tung continued to look at her in confusion. In fact, I don't know what's going on, but I can sense a lot of things related to Mama. It's the changes that happened to you. When Mama died, I was already conscious. At the last sentence, he suddenly lowered his head and watched helplessly as his Mama was forced to self-destruct. Lin Xiao's hatred and despair stimulated him, making him instinctively want to help her. But there was nothing he could do. It wasn't until he hated himself and felt the final despair and unwillingness of her Mama that his heart suddenly seemed to have broken something. An invisible force enveloped him and Mama. Then Lin Xiao brought him back to life. However, because he instinctively only wanted to help Lin Xiao directly woke up from a fresh zombie body, and he himself only woke up from that space after a period of time. To be honest, this space was actually Little Tung Tung's own ability. It was a latent ability that he had when he was in Lin Xiao's original body. It was stimulated by Lin Xiao's emotions at that time. So when he stayed in Lin Xiao's space, the primary control was still in his hands, and the secondary control was Lin Xiao. Until later, when he used that kind of method to give birth to himself, he transferred the full control of this space to Lin Xiao. This was also why Lin Xiao felt that she had full control of the space after giving birth to the child. After hearing his words, Lin Xiao couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then she revealed a dumbfounded expression and looked at him blankly. Chapter 1386. After being stunned for a while, Lin Xiao looked at Tungting and asked him uncertainly, So did you save me at that time? She could sense Tingting's thoughts, so she was even more surprised. She couldn't help looking at him up and down in surprise. She didn't expect her son to have this kind of power. It turned out that he was the one who had reborn her. Why did their space system have such a special effect? This child had made her reborn into someone else's body, and Lin Wenwen had been reborn 7 years ago. It was almost the same. Tungting thought for a moment and said, well, sort of. But at that time, my superpower hadn't been awakened yet. I just don't know why it suddenly broke out. I don't quite understand. He also remembered a lot of things after he was born. Before he was born, his memory was in a relatively chaotic and vague state. There was a kind of feeling called being eager to protect one's child. When a mother encountered a child in danger, she would risk her life to save her child. This was a kind of maternal instinct. But was he being eager to protect his mother? Lin Xiao put down the information in her hand and put him on her lap. She hugged him tightly in her arms and rested her chin on the top of his bald head. I used to hate Yang Jianhua, but now I have to thank him for bringing you to me. She had never figured out why she was reborn. She never thought that it was Tungting who saved her. It was this child who gave her a second life and gave her a second chance to live. Little Tung Tung sensed her complicated emotions and patted her arm with his lotus-like little hand. He said, well, I also want to thank him for making me Mama's son. Wu Yueling, who was next to them, looked at the mother and daughter in confusion. She couldn't understand what they were saying at all. But when she saw Lin Xiao holding Tungting affectionately, she couldn't help but come over and hug them with open arms. Lin Xiao let go of Wu Yueling and put her on the sofa next to her. Then she touched her head. Well, you two should go to bed. Lingling, take Tingting to bed. After touching Wu Yueling's head, Lin Xiao let go of her hand and held Tingting in front of Wu Yueling. Well, Mama, good night. Good night, Mama. Wu Yueling consciously slid down from the sofa and stood on the ground. Then, he picked up little Tung Tung and said good night to Lin Xiao before turning around and walking into their room. Good night. Lin Xiao responded and watched the two of them walk over. After entering the door, she turned around and continued to read the documents in her hands. The information stated Professor Bai's experience in the underground and what they had done. After watching for a whole night, Lin Xiao finally figured out what was going on. It turned out that Professor Bai had brought people down to find out the source of the doomsday virus. Scientists from various places felt that it had something to do with the underground, so they went down. In the end, he encountered many mutated subterranean creatures. That was less than 2 years after the apocalypse, and the humans' abilities and weapons weren't that powerful. Hence, when they encountered these invulnerable, powerful, and incomparably ferocious underground creatures, they were naturally powerless. Unfortunately, Professor Bai wasn't a law-abiding person. While hiding from those things underground, he probed the substances underground and conducted various tests and experiments at the same time. As a result, some of the things underground accidentally fused together, resulting in a mutation that caused the air in the entire underground space to change. In the beginning, the subterranean creatures didn't advance so quickly, but after Professor Bai's actions, the subterranean creatures began to advance rapidly. When things got out of control, they were attacked by the subterranean creatures. After reading the report, Lin Xiao snorted coldly. She thought that it was really the old man's doing that caused the underground space to be filled with that kind of abnormal energy. Fortunately, Lin Wenwen brought back clean catnip. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to deal with the poisonous energy in the underground space. Lin Xiao was now prepared for the worst-case scenario, where the energy in the underground space couldn't be controlled and rushed to the surface. So when she knew that the energy in her space and the catnip energy could deal with the underground energy, she began to plant catnip in her space in the past 2 days. It was the seeds that Lin Wenwen brought back. Of course, it was still Lu Tianyi, the exclusive farm owner of her space. Moreover, Lin Xiao sent a batch of zombies into the space for him to do. After all, opening up the land and planting the seeds required a lot of help. It was a pity that Lu Jun had been seduced by Xie Dong. Otherwise, Lin Xiao would have wanted to pair the two of them up. Lu Jun, who was in the cultivation base of Wushan, inexplicably felt a chill down his back. At this time Lu Tianyi, who was buried in Lin Xiao's space, also felt a chill down his back. Lin Xiao suddenly felt that her thoughts had gone astray. She thought of her 2 younger brothers and 1 younger sister, and didn't know when she would be able to sell them. Lin Hao wasn't young anymore. Was there a girl suitable for him? Reaching out to wave away her thoughts, Lin Xiao lowered her head and continued to read the information. After more than 5 years of changes, the supernatural energy in the underground space was almost saturated and burrowed everywhere. In another 2 years, the superpower would definitely overflow from the ground. Those underground creatures could find a way out. If the energy continued to increase, it was hard to imagine what the consequences would be. After reading the information, Lin Xiao entered the space. She saw Lu Tianyi leading a group of level 3 and 4 zombies, digging the ground in full swing with a hoe. She looked at Lu Tianyi and felt that it was about time to give him a boost in strength. This kid was still level 5, although he was a leader. But no matter how she looked at it, he was still a bit weak. It was better to give him a boost to the level of a level 1 king before dealing with Wuxia. Not only did she want to give Lu Tianyi a boost in strength, but she also wanted to give everyone who followed her into the underground space a share. However, if she wanted to raise the level 6 to level 7, she still needed some energy cores. It seemed that she had to let Elmar and the others go out to hunt for some energy cores tomorrow. After she reached level 8, Lin Xiao's space had expanded a lot. Just the lake alone had become a lot bigger. With the lake as the center, there was a large piece of land on the side of the building, and there was also the land on the side of the forest opposite the building. The 3 places had expanded several times. Anyway, at a glance, she couldn't see the edge of the lawn on the opposite side. And on the side of the building, the 3 small spaces that were originally a few hundred meters behind the building were now a few kilometers away. They couldn't be seen anymore around the building, other than the open space in front of the building, which was used as an activity area. The surrounding area was either planted with melons and vegetables, or raised chickens, ducks, and geese. Chapter 1387. Since Xigongchen hasn't made a move yet, she'll use tonight's time to help Lu Tianyi level up. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao's mind moved, and a few water-type zombie cores appeared in her hands. 1 level 6 and 5 level 5. Her body flashed, and she directly teleported to where Lu Tianyi was. In her own space, she only needed to think about it, and she could teleport anywhere in the space. Seeing Lin Xiao suddenly appear beside him, Lu Tianyi put down the hoe and stood up straight. He used his hand to hold the hoe and turned his head to look at her. "What do you need?" Lin Xiao showed him the zombie cores in her hands and said, "Let them do it first. Come with me and level up." Lu Tianyi looked at her in surprise and asked, "Now? Weren't they about to start a war with China? She still had time to level up with him?" Lin Xiao nodded. "Yes, Xigongchen won't make a move immediately. I'll help you today. Tomorrow, I'll see what's going on in China and decide whether or not I should help the members of the mission increase their strength before the war starts. Come here." After saying that, she waved at Lu Tianyi and walked towards the lake. Lu Tianyi carried the hoe and walked out of the ground. He put the tools to the side and walked towards Lin Xiao. However, he didn't walk too fast, because he still had to wait for Lin Xiao to suppress the energy in the lake. Lin Xiao walked to the side of the lake and threw his clothes on the shore. He wrapped himself in a black mist and went into the water. After going into the water, the energy in the lake gathered at the bottom of the lake. Lu Tianyi, who felt no pressure, walked over and looked at the pile of clothes that Lin Xiao took off. He then looked down at his own clothes. Then he frowned and took off his clothes. When he was only left with his underwear, he paused for a moment. He looked back and saw that the zombies in the distance had all turned their heads back and continued with their work as if nothing had happened. Lu Tianyi's face darkened. "Do you think that just because you covered Xiao Xiao's eyes with your hands, you can openly stare at his lower body?" This brat was still sizing him up. Was he trying to see how big his little brother was? Turning around and taking a deep breath, Lu Tianyi thought about it. Should he go down in his underwear and be melted? Or should he take it off and go down? If he continued to wear it, wouldn't he still have to come up naked after the deed was done? He still had to find a new one to wear. Forget it, just take it off. If you want to look, then look. In any case, it's not smaller than that kid from Junglers. Humph. While thinking, Lu Tianyi took off the fork and plunged into the water. As soon as he dived into the water, Lu Tianyi immediately felt something wrapping around him and quickly dragging him down. Suddenly, a thought came to him. Are you showing off your figure up there? Touch like this. Lu Tianyi rolled his eyes and thought to himself, there's no show. They wanted to peek. It's my fault. After Lin Xiao pulled him down, he turned his back to her. Then she scattered a few zombie cores around him and let him absorb them. It wasn't the first time Lu Tianyi's level had been increased by her. After seeing the zombie cores, he took a level 5 one in each hand and began to absorb them. Lin Xiao pressed one hand on his back and helped him filter the energy of the zombie cores. Lu Tianyi didn't level up for long. He was originally a water elemental. Water elemental energy was relatively mild. Therefore, after Lin Xiao controlled the energy at the bottom of the lake to filter the energy of the zombie cores, Lu Tianyi's zombie cores quickly reached a saturation level. In the end, she took the level 6 one for him to break through and enter the level 6 stage in one fell swoop. In less than a night, Lu Tianyi and Lin Xiao came out of the water in a few hours. As Lin Xiao wrapped herself in a black fog and began to put on clothes, Lu Tianyi just silently looked at the zombies in the field. They turned their heads back and continued to work. After Lin Xiao put on his clothes, he suddenly looked at the tranquil surface of the lake inside. I wonder if I'll unlock this method of having to go to the bottom of the lake to help you guys level up after I reach level 9? It would be great if I could extract the energy from the lake. Lu Tianyi, who was wearing pants, looked at her with his upper body naked. This is not bad. You can enjoy different people's bodies. Lin Xiao turned her head and glanced at him. Sorry, I'm not interested in nude art. You'll get a needle eye if you look at it too much. She inexplicably thought of that old man Gua. Hey! Something strange had snuck in. Lin Xiao hurriedly waved away the wrinkled body of old man Gua she saw when he was taking a bath. After Lu Tianyi put on clothes, he looked back at the lake inexplicably. Although he was a water elemental, the water in this lake couldn't be controlled at all. Moreover, he couldn't sense the existence of the water elemental energy at all. It seemed that the water in this lake was formed by that special energy. As soon as Lin Xiao came up, the pressure in the lake immediately spread. Lu Tianyi only stayed by the lake for a few minutes before he couldn't stand it anymore. He quickly left the lakeside and walked towards the small building. The next day, Lin Xiao went to a meeting with everyone early in the morning. Last night, there was news from Haicheng. Xikongchen is preparing to send people to the area where the underground creatures are in 2 days. Should we intercept them? Lin Feng asked Lin Xiao, who was sitting at the head of the table with the news from Haicheng. Lin Xiao leaned against the back of the chair, crossed her arms in front of her chest, and glanced at him. She didn't answer him. Instead, she turned to Xia Dong, who was sitting on the left, and asked, Have you found out about China's action route towards South and East China? Xia Dong nodded. Yes. This was easy to find because if Xikongchen wanted to lure the underground creatures, he would definitely start at the place where they gathered. Everyone knew where the underworld creatures were gathering in the eastern and southern parts of China. Lin Xiao's eyes flickered slightly. She turned to look at Lin Feng and nodded, saying, Then let's send people to set up an ambush and give Xikongchen a surprise. Let's see if he likes it. Lin Feng asked, Should we send the 2nd Legion alone? Lin Xiao shook her head. No, let the 1st Legion go for the main mission this time. It's time to send your men out for actual combat. Every time you send people from the 2nd Legion, your men are going to be rusty. Lin Feng didn't expect Lin Xiao to send out the human legion from the first base. He looked at her in surprise. Lin Xiao raised her eyebrows. Why, is there a problem? Of course not. Lin Feng immediately shook his head at her. Then, he turned to look at Yuan Tianxing. Chapter 1388. Since the establishment of the Universal Base, Lin Xiao had always brought the army from the 2nd base with her on every mission. Only when Lin Feng went out to collect resources would he bring them along with him. However, most of the soldiers were still training in the base. Also, because there were very few people in the first base, they didn't have to find another training ground for them. They just opened up an area next to the first base. The army in the first base originally had 2,000 to 3,000 people. Due to the second virus outbreak, the number was reduced by a small portion. Later, they were filled up again, which was how they managed to reach the current size of 5,000 people. However, most of them were still new soldiers. They weren't used to fighting as a group and needed more training. Lin Feng, take 3 basic troops and move out. I will send a troop from the second base to secretly escort you from behind. The army that Wuxia sent out this time, and their weapons aren't simple. Don't be too careless. Lin Xiao looked at Lin Feng and the others on the right, and said to Lin Feng after assigning the troops. Yes. Lin Feng nodded at her. Lin Xiao turned to look at Qiu Lili and Lin Kuei, who were sitting in the middle on the left, and said, Lily, you and Lin Kuei will lead the second legion and follow behind them. Only attack when they really can't handle it. Understood. Qiu Lili and Lin Kuei nodded at the same time. Elmar, for the next few days, take all the rank first kings in the second legion, and collect a large amount of energy cores. Corpse cores, plant cores, animal cores. Lin Xiao ordered Elmar, who was sitting next to Xiadong, after instructing Yu Lili and Xiadong. Elmar was a little stunned. Huh, we still need to collect energy cores at this time? Weren't they preparing for war? Why was she still needed to take people to collect energy cores? And most of the level 1 kings were to be taken away. If there was an emergency, wouldn't there be no more people? Lin Xiao smiled at her and said, That's right. This is the time. I'll give you 5 days. Within these 5 days, send people to collect energy cores every day, no matter how many there are. Don't worry. At least within these 5 days, Xikongchen won't do anything big. We can deal with small tricks, and even if he does something, it will definitely be against Sea City. What she meant was that she wanted to take advantage of these few days to upgrade all the zombies in the second base from level 5 to level 6. If a level 6 king were to make a big move against the base, a level 1 king would have the strength to summon all the wild zombies in the surrounding area. Therefore, for the sake of efficiency, Elmar's side had to speed up the process of collecting energy cores. Hearing this, Elmar nodded. He replied, All right. Lin Xiao looked at her and reminded, In the next few days, I'll have to trouble you guys to increase the number of energy cores you collect. Elmar understood what she meant and expressed that she had no opinion. I understand. After talking about the important mission, Lin Xiao moved on to the next matter. There's one more thing. It's about the information that Yuan Tianxing looked through yesterday. In fact, it was man-made that caused the changes in the underground space, causing many low-level underground creatures to be unable to survive. Because these creatures have high levels of intelligence, I don't think they will be able to go back to live. I'm afraid that they won't be able to go back even if they want to. Moreover, if we don't seal the underground space, after a few years, the underground energy will overflow through the channels left by these creatures. Therefore, in order to deal with the emergence of these abilities, we need to plant a large area of catnip that when brought back. But before planting the catnip, we need to purify the land. After we get rid of Xikongchen and Wuxia, we'll discuss how to proceed with this plan with Sea City and the other bases. But we can try to plant some ourselves first and see how the production is. This was a long-term project because in order to plant clean catnip without any mutation, they had to first purify the land. Currently, only Lin Xiao could do this, because she had the spatial lake, which was endless. There was another method, which was the soilless cultivation in Wuxia. But without the nourishment of the soil, the energy contained in the soilless cultivation plant was much lower than that of the plants grown in the soil. Now in the Wushan cultivation base managed by Lu Jun, in addition to the large pond that was dug before, there were more than a dozen large ponds. Of course, the water in the ponds wasn't all transported from Lin Xiao's spatial lake, but water from the river. Then, they added the lake water from Lin Xiao's spatial lake to purify it before watering the land. As for the watered land, They had to wait for a period of time until the energy of the virus was gone before they could dig a hole to plant the catnip. But because of the mature cultivation experience in the Wuxian cultivation base, this wasn't a difficult problem. The difficult part was that the catnip had to be planted in large quantities to have an effect. Moreover, they had to wait for 2 to 3 years for their growth period to come out. Their own energy had to be released into the air to a certain depth before they could resist the energy underground. Are we going to plant these plants? But how many years do we have to plant catnip to be able to resist the energy? Can't you seal up the entire underground space? Elmar asked her, puzzled. Logically speaking, the most effective way now was to seal the underground space and block the passage connecting it to the surface. Lin Xiao said, that's only one aspect. We also have to prepare for the worst. We have to deal with this situation in many ways. Look at the entire country, and not just in China. These underground creatures are even appearing in foreign countries, which means that there are more than just a dozen or so exits to the underground space. There are probably hundreds or even thousands of them. We won't be able to find them all, let alone seal them all. Moreover, there are also exotic beasts in the underground space. They are all intelligent, and will think of ways to break the passage we seal. So considering the worst-case scenario in a few years or a decade, we might as well plant the most useful catnip now. Anyway, no matter what happens in the future, it will definitely be beneficial to us. The others looked at each other and didn't say anything. Elmar also revealed a thoughtful expression. Of course, our most important task now is to deal with Wuxia. Wait until the matter with Wuxia is settled, then we can slowly study the underground space. We can't rush it. This isn't just a matter of our base. We have to discuss it with other bases. Lin Xiao finished talking about some minor details and ended the meeting. Chapter 1389. That afternoon, everyone started to move quickly. Lin Feng brought out 3 basic groups from the First Army and a basic zombie group from Qiu Lily's side. That afternoon, they went to the gathering place of the underground creatures near the base and waited for an ambush. They didn't care about Haiqing because Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao had made the same arrangement. Elmar took 20 level First Kings from the Second Army to hunt for energy nuclei at noon. That night, Lin Xiao received a batch of level 5 and level 6 energy nuclei from Elmar's people. There were zombie nuclei, plant nuclei and animal nuclei. Lin Xiao took the energy nuclei from Elmar and started to level up the first batch of level 5 zombies. That night, Lu Tianyi saw a few level 5 zombies standing in a line on an empty space not far from the lake. One by one, they were waiting to go down to the lake to level up. Before going down, they were level 5, and after coming up they were level 6. Zhong, whose full name was Wan Lizhong, was originally a level 5 leader. This time, he was also promoted to level 6, a level 1 king. Ju had also been promoted. Although this guy was always causing trouble, his fighting strength was not weak either. Lin Xiao was at ease with old Madame Lu following behind him. After 2 or 3 levels, Lin Xiao suddenly felt that it was too slow. She climbed out of the lake and stood on the shore covered in black fog. She stared at the remaining people and looked back and forth thinking. Lu Tianyi wandered over. What's wrong? Lin Xiao said. It's too slow, I need to be faster. After thinking for a while, she suddenly pointed at the remaining 3 level 5 leaders and said, You 3. Come down together. Lu Tianyi looked at her with doubt. Oh, you want to do it in bulk? Lin Xiao nodded. I'll try and see if it works. The remaining 3 zombies looked at each other. All of them rejoiced in their hearts. Fortunately, all 3 of them were men. So Lin Xiao went into the water again. The 3 level 5 leaders looked at each other and quickly took off their clothes. Then the 3 of them subconsciously glanced at the other 2. The dark eyes of the zombies flashed a hint of unknown meaning. Then they walked into the water together. After entering the water, Lin Xiao closed his eyes and sensed the location of the 3 of them. Then, he used his spiritual power to control the energy in the water and pulled them down to him. She could sense the 3 of them, but they couldn't sense Lin Xiao. They could only sense that they were being pulled down. Lin Xiao threw the energy cores in his hands around their bodies and used his mind to tell them to absorb them boldly. Meanwhile, she concentrated on splitting the energy in the water into 3 parts and injected it into their hearts. Fortunately, she did not need too many energy cores to upgrade these level 5 leaders. Normally, 3 to 5 level 5 leaders and 1 level 6 leader would be enough to upgrade them to a level 1 king. Under the influence of Lin Xiao's lake water, the energy they absorbed was even purer and could increase the energy of their zombie cores to the greatest extent. The 3 level 1 kings who had just been successfully upgraded stood in a row about 10 meters away from the lake, waiting for Lin Xiao to come out. While Lin Xiao was upgrading the zombies, a red shadow flew past the periphery of the base. It didn't go near the base, but turned around and flew towards the Wuxian base. After it flew over, a huge black shadow flashed on the ground and also flew towards the direction of Wuxian. Dehei and Er Wang, who were resting in the mountain, immediately raised their heads and looked in its direction. Then they stood up, especially Er Wang. After standing up, he turned his head and hid behind Dehei, who had curled up into a small black mountain. Dehei Xing glanced at it calmly, then turned his head and continued to look in front. At this time, the zombies who were still working at night all stopped. They turned their heads and looked in the direction of Dehei and the others. In front of Lu Jun's wooden house, the 2 level 1 kings, Fox and Pit, appeared beside her. "It's that big red cat again. What does it want?" Pit asked curiously. The chubby round-faced fox said, "I heard from the people who went out with the leader this time that this big cat has been following the leader. Is it looking for the leader to be its poop shoveler? Anyway, our leader has raised a mutant snake, a zombie dog, and a big mushroom that can run. It doesn't seem strange to raise such a big underground cat." Pit shrugged. Lu Jun smiled and said, "Anyway, it doesn't have any evil intentions. But what's with that big dog?" "Oh, you mean that Tibetan Mastiff with fur all over its body? I don't know. It seems like it likes to run behind the leader like that big cat." Pit thought for a while and said. Fox shook her head. "No, this big dog doesn't seem to be following the leader. I feel that it is more interested in the leader's Er Wang." Lu Jun and Pit looked at her curiously. "Huh, how do you know it is interested in Er Wang?" Fox smiled. Her face was originally a little round, but when she smiled, her eyes became 2 slits. She looked a little like a little fox. "Intuition. I'm a fox animal intuition," she said with a smile. Pit. Lu Jun. Alright. This fellow's ability was also a rare natural animal. It was a fox. At daybreak, the 2 large cat and dog groups left quickly. Then they would come back at night and leave again at daybreak. Lin Xiao would deal with matters during the day and continue to level up the zombie leaders at night. After such a large batch of leveling up, her army only used 2 to 3 nights to increase the number of level 1 kings. That morning, she had just sat down in the office for a while when she received news from Xiadong. The Wuxia side had dispatched people to deal with the underworld creatures. Lin Xiao looked at the report and smiled faintly. "Come, we're just waiting for you." On the other hand, China had sent out dozens of teams, which were scattered in 3 directions: East China, Northeast China, and Northwest China. The East China team was definitely targeting Universal Base and Haicheng, while the Northeast and Northwest China teams were targeting Black Dragon Base and Qingshan Base. China had no intention of attacking the Meng tribe, because even without threats, the Meng tribe had already submitted to China. Chapter 1390. Lin Xiao was sitting in the office when Duan Wan knocked on the door. She walked to her desk and said, "Aren't you going to take care of your pets? What's wrong?" Lin Xiao looked up at her. Duan Wan said, "They go to Wuxian Base every night. What do they want?" Lin Xiao shrugged. "How do I know what they want? But they shouldn't do anything bad." She had to keep an eye on Wuxia and the underground creatures during the day, so that she could come up with countermeasures in time. At night, she had to level up the zombie army. How could she have time to deal with these big guys? Anyway, that guy wouldn't do anything bad, so let it do as it pleased. She couldn't chase it away since she couldn't call it back to the base. You said they didn't do anything bad? Duanwan looked at her strangely and asked again. Junjun, Kinking and the others are going crazy with anger, aren't they? Aren't they helping? Lin Xiao looked at her doubtfully. They're just more of a hindrance. Duanwan was speechless. Speaking of which, these few had indeed been helping out for the past few nights. Because Lin Xiao gave Lu Jun the task of opening up new land, the zombies were digging the ground day and night. When Wang was happy, he would dig a few times. But every time, Pit and Fox would chase him away with a hoe. The loose ground was only 10 to 20 centimeters deep, and the loose soil was immediately scattered. But this guy dug a 1 to 2 meter deep hole. What was it doing? How was this a thing? It was burying a corpse. As a result, Pit, and the fox could only drive it away and fill up the hole it dug. When Wang saw that his hole was filled up, he was unhappy. So when they weren't paying attention, he would sneak over to dig. Seeing it digging a hole, the two outsiders also started to follow suit. As for those claws, just 2 claws would be enough to make a big hole. Lu Juanha and Pitts were so angry that they would pick up a hoe and beat them up for no reason. But these were mutant beasts with thick skin. They weren't afraid at all. It made them want to use their abilities to attack them. Fortunately, the 2 dogs were also very smart. As soon as they saw them coming over with hoes or shovels, they immediately turned around and ran. Dahe and the other Dahong were leisurely watching the fun. Anyway, without Lin Xiao, no one would be able to deal with them. Lin Xiao said with a smile. Forget about Dahong. What about the Tibetan Mastiff? Have you taken a fancy to our Erwang? No way, isn't Erwang a male? Of course, that giant Tibetan Mastiff was also a male. Duanwan raised her eyebrows at her. How would I know? I don't understand dog language. I think you should take some time to take a look. Otherwise, if they really dig holes everywhere, people will have to fill them up. Are you more of a hindrance than a help? Lin Xiao had no choice but to agree. All right, I understand. In the afternoon, Lin Xiao's work came to an end. Then he brought the 2 little ones to the Wushan base. The circle of flat land at the foot of Mount Wu had almost been completely developed by Lu Jun and his men. The mountain was divided into 2 sides. One side was planted with a large number of fruit trees, and the other was used as a training camp for the zombie army. As for Erwang and the others, they would stay in the woods near the training camp when they had nothing to do. When Lin Xiao came over, they immediately smelled her scent. So as soon as she arrived at the cabin, a large animal appeared. Dahe, come here. Before Lin Xiao called them, Tung Tung in her arms had already waved to Dahe, who was slipping over. Dahe, who was swimming, stopped, raised its head and looked at her, then lowered its head and slid toward them. Mama, I want to sit on its back. Tung Tung looked up and said to Lin Xiao. Although Tung Tung was still very small, with a total height of less than 40 centimeters, it was really very short. Dahe, on the other hand, was very large. Its middle part was already thicker than a bucket, and its body length was nearly 100 meters. It didn't dare to come here by the small path, so it had to walk on the main road. Otherwise, the small path would be flattened by it. Therefore, it was completely possible for Tung Tung to sit on it. While Tung Tung was talking to Lin Xiao, Dahe had already swam to them. Why do you like to sit on it? You can sit on Hua Hua or Erwang. Lin Xiao looked at her son speechlessly. This child didn't like a fluffy mount, but liked the smooth Dahe? Tung Ting seemed to be able to sense Lin Xiao's thoughts and said, because it's more comfortable to sit on Dahe. Lin Xiao was somewhat confused, so she put him on Dahe's back and let him sit on it. Although Tung Tung was short and couldn't walk, he could sit on Dahe's back steadily. But he could sit steadily on Dahe's back and wouldn't fall off at all. Judging from the fact that he could crawl around on the floor, he still had strong control over his body. But he just couldn't stand up, not knowing whether his legs were too soft or something else. As soon as these giant animals appeared, the surroundings immediately became crowded. The other 2 were a little closer to them. One was flying in the sky, and the other was looking at them from 20 or 30 meters away on the main road. Come on, Erwang, come here. After putting her son on Dahe's back, Lin Xiao turned and waved to Erwang. After thinking for a while, she waved to the bigger dog dozens of meters away and said, the one over there, come here too. The Tibetan Mastiff, which was as big as a buffalo, immediately stood up, and its curled tail immediately drooped down. It just looked at Lin Xiao quietly, and didn't come directly. Seeing that it was still unwilling, Lin Xiao immediately pointed to her Wang, and said to the Tibetan Mastiff, "If you don't come here, I'll put it into the space." Woof! Hearing her words, the Tibetan Mastiff immediately barked at her. It seemed very dissatisfied. Lin Xiao waved to it and said, "You don't want to? Then why don't you come here?" This dog was more obedient than her Wang. As soon as Lin Xiao said so, it immediately came to her slowly and unwillingly, step by step. When Wang saw it approaching, it hid behind Lin Xiao in fear. Lin Xiao patted its head and said, "Why are you hiding? Do you know what you've done? You dug such a big hole, and asked someone to help you fill it. You're here to make trouble, right? It's fine if you dig it yourself, but why did you take it to dig it?" While scolding Wang, she glanced at the Tibetan Mastiff again. Woof! Wang immediately lowered its head, and peeked at her from the corner of its eyes after being patted by her. Seeing her serious face, it immediately lowered its eyes again. Seeing that Wang had been hit, the Tibetan Mastiff stopped. It looked at Lin Xiao, and then at Wang. Then it continued to walk slowly toward Lin Xiao. Chapter 1391. The Tibetan Mastiff was as big as a cow, and covered with black fur. It walked over with an imposing manner. If it weren't for the fact that she couldn't see its eyes, Lin Xiao tilted her head to the left and right, but she couldn't find its eyes in its bangs. She looked at it in confusion, pulled Wang out from behind her, and asked the Tibetan Mastiff, "Why do you like it so much? The two of you are of different species, right? Can you still sense the same kind?" The Tibetan Mastiff walked to a few meters in front of her, and found a suitable place to sit down. It looked at Lin Xiao without saying a word. Although Lin Xiao didn't know how it saw her through its thick fur, she knew that it was looking at her. "Since you want to help, you can, but you can't be like it, digging a big hole. Can you please be gentle?" Lin Xiao said to the black Tibetan Mastiff. She suddenly looked around and said to Junjun, "Help me get a hoe." Lu Jun took the hoe from the door of the tool room, and handed it to her. Lin Xiao said to the Tibetan Mastiff, "You do it. Watch how I dig. I didn't dig very deep, right? Like this. Dig it out and pat the soil to scatter it." Everyone was speechless. They couldn't react to the situation in front of them. Their boss was teaching a dog how to loosen the soil. The black Tibetan Mastiff looked at Lin Xiao's movements, and looked at its claws. It stretched its sharp claws a few times, and gently scratched the ground a few times. Although it was a little deeper than Lin Xiao's, it was much better than digging a deep hole in the ground like before. Then, it imitated Lin Xiao's actions, and used its claws to poke and scatter the soil that was dug out. Yes, it used its claws to poke the soil. Alas, yes. That's it. That's right. The pit you dug before still needs me to help you bury it. Lin Xiao looked at its masterpiece, and praised it with a smile. Wang, who was next to them, turned its head and looked at them. At this time, Tungting patted Dahe and slipped over from behind. He looked at the Tibetan Mastiff and said to Wang, "Look, it's much smarter than you. Hasn't your IQ awakened yet?" Wang only turned his head, and looked at him blankly, not making a sound. At this time, Lin Xiao filled up the place that he had just dug and flattened it. Then he said to Wang and the black Tibetan Mastiff, "Come on. Since you want to help so much, come with me." Everyone watched in confusion as Lin Xiao brought the two dogs to the mountain area that was about to be developed. Then they heard her say to the two dogs, "Come, come, come. Your claws are sharp. Dig up these trees and grass first. Then slowly dig the soil. Remember, don't dig too deep." She pointed to the bushes and shrubs on the mountain forest. With a wave of her hand, she cut off a wave of vegetation, and said to the two dogs, since these two liked to cause trouble so much, she would let them be more serious about it. Woof! Wang looked at Lin Xiao with a dumbfounded expression. Then, he jumped over and started cutting the plants with his claws. The black Tibetan Mastiff stood still. Lin Xiao looked at it, and found that it was actually looking at the area of the forest. He was probably trying to measure the area that Lin Xiao was talking about. And what is it doing? Lin Xiao looked at the big dog in confusion. Then in the next second, she suddenly heard a series of barking sounds coming from the distance. The others also raised their heads and looked around. It's not going to summon a bunch of dogs, is it? Fox said with a bewildered expression. As soon as she finished speaking, she heard the sound of wind gradually coming from afar, followed by the smell of different mutant dogs. Lin Xiao. Everyone. What was going on? Soon, after a while, mutated dogs began to jump out from all directions. There were all kinds of them. Some were big, some were small, some were long, some were short. Woof woof woof. Woof woof woof. Woof woof woof. A group of dogs appeared and stood at the edge of the field. They did not approach. They did not step into the crops, but sat on stones or trees. Lin Xiao looked at the black Tibetan Mastiff speechlessly. She didn't know what this guy wanted to do by summoning an army of dogs. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to invade my mountain? Among those dogs, there were high and low levels. The high ones were level 5, and there were 2 that were level 6 like the black Tibetan Mastiff. One was a Kunlun with 2 ears erect, and the other was a Labrador with 2 ears drooping. The black Tibetan Mastiff barked at the group of dogs again. Woof woof. Then, the dogs from level 4 to level 6 all ran toward it, and they did not step into the field. Instead, they were like humans, jumping over from the field. But looking at their size, the largest of these dogs was only a little bigger than Erwang. They were not as big as the black Tibetan Mastiff. The black Tibetan Mastiff was like the king of dogs in this group of dogs. Duan appeared beside Lin Xiao and asked curiously, why did it summon so many of its kind? Only a small portion came over, and most of them were still watching from the outside. Lin Xiao shook his head and said, how would I know? I don't understand dog language. So, everyone quietly watched what this group of dogs was going to do. Then, they saw that the black Tibetan Mastiff actually commanded the dogs to line up and head toward the mountain that Lin Xiao pointed out to it. One by one, they used their claws to pluck the grass and cut down the trees. That's right, they lined up in a row. It was very neat. And the 2 level 6 dogs that came later supervised these level 4 and 5 dogs, while the black Tibetan Mastiff guided them from behind. This Tibetan Mastiff's IQ is higher than Erwang's. This ability to understand is really amazing. After seeing this scene, Duan couldn't help but exclaim, looking at these giant dogs that were the size of calves, all using their sharp claws to pluck the grass and cut down the trees. Soon, when they passed through the forest, a clean area was opened up. The grass that was plucked and the trees that were cut down fell to the ground. Then, the black Tibetan Mastiff called the low-level dogs behind him to drag the chopped-down plants into a pile. Then a fire-type dog set fire to it. Very good. Lin Xiao didn't teach them what to do after that. The black Tibetan Mastiff had learned from the zombies. See, they are different from you. At this time, Lin Xiao turned his head and patted Erwang's head. He said in disdain, Erwang. Lu Jun and the others also came behind Lin Xiao at this time. Lin Xiao turned his head and said to them, see, this time is considered helping seriously? Lu Jun. These dogs have become demons, right? Chapter 1392. With the sudden addition of a large group of dogs, the progress of Lu Jun's land development accelerated a lot. Although these dogs didn't know how to do complicated things, they were very good at destroying the forest. The 2 level 6 dogs that followed the Tibetan Mastiffs were also very smart. Even among ordinary dogs, Kunlun dogs and Labrador dogs had high IQs. Not to mention now that they had grown to a mutated level 6, it was like they had really become spirits. The dogs on the mountain would cut down trees, burn wood, and loosen the soil. Then Lu Jun and the others would draw water from the pond to irrigate the land 3 times a day. After watering for a few days, they waited for the soil to cool down. When the water in the pond seeped into the ground, it would take a week or 2 for the land to be completely purified. Only then could the catnip seeds that Lin Wenwen brought back be planted. Because of Lin Xiao's diluted lake water, the nutrients of the land were not lost. Instead, it became more and more fertile. Therefore, they didn't have to worry about the seeds not being able to grow. After 2 hours of observation, They found that these dogs were very disciplined. With the 3 level 6 advanced mutated dogs watching over them, they wouldn't make trouble, so Lin Xiao let them be. He took Tungting and Wu Yueling back to the base. Not long after sitting down, he saw Xie Dong come back. "How's the situation?" Lin Xiao asked when he saw him come in. Xie Dong nodded and said, "Si Kongchun sent people to guard the place, but they haven't started yet. And he also received news that Haiqing has cleared the batch of virus drugs. He's about to vomit blood." Saying that, a very faint smile appeared on his face. Since he was betrayed by his teammates, died, became a zombie, and was betrayed by the woman he fell in love with, he rarely showed a smile. Following Lin Xiao, the expression on his face had always been indifferent, as if nothing had changed, and his presence was very low. He didn't know if it was because he took over the task of collecting intelligence for Lin Xiao that he deliberately reduced his presence, or if he didn't want to show himself. Hearing his words, Lin Xiao laughed. "Oh, Haiqing cleaned up his spies, he will definitely receive the news. Because Wu Qingyue doesn't seem to intend to hide this matter, maybe he also wants to give him a surprise. It seems that he is very surprised." This was the second time he was about to vomit blood. There would probably be a third time soon. At this time, in the leader's office in China, Si Kongchen's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He glared at Wei Haichao and Han Xiao and said angrily, "What's going on? Why did Wu Qingyue suddenly receive the news? Moreover, he had even obtained the name list. How did he know?" He stared at the two of them, his eyes revealing a cold suspicion. Such a detailed plan was actually discovered by the other party, just as they were about to take action. Wu Qingyue had clearly spent so much time setting it up, but he hadn't noticed it at all. How did he suddenly discover it now? What was even more bizarre was that the other party had even obtained the name list of those who had taken the virus. Every single one of them had been eliminated, and his plan had come to a premature end. So if it wasn't for someone leaking the news, it would have been impossible. He didn't believe it. Wei Haichao and Han Zhao's faces turned gloomy and sullen when they were stared at by Si Kongchen's suspicious and cold gaze. In such a situation, people of their status would definitely not defend themselves anymore. So they could only silently bear the anger of their boss. Even if Si Kongchen suspected them, they wouldn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. After all, the two of them were also suspecting whether it was their own people who leaked it. But if it wasn't their own people, then how did others sneak in to inquire about the news? Si Kongchen looked at them coldly and said again, "Don't you have anything to say?" He had no idea that this matter was actually not leaked by someone else. Wei Haichao didn't speak, and Si Kongchen turned his head to stare at Han Xiao. Han Xiao was the manager of the entire intelligence and information system in the base. He knew everything, and for such a confidential matter, he was also responsible for keeping it confidential. So, he also had the responsibility for the leak of confidential information. After Han Xiao felt his gaze, he immediately raised his head, puffed out his chest and said, "I will give you an answer on this matter in 3 days." Si Kongchen took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and was quiet for a few seconds. After suppressing the indistinct blue veins on his forehead, he said, "Very well, then I will give you 3 days. If you can't give me a satisfactory answer in 3 days, then you can do as you see fit." Han Xiao heaved a sigh of relief. He turned around and left. Before leaving, he glanced at Wei Haichao next to him, and didn't say anything before walking out. Wei Haichao was glanced at by him, and his eyes darkened. Then, he looked at Si Kongchen without changing his expression and said, "Maybe it wasn't our own people who leaked it. Now that the woman from the Universal Base has come back in advance. And look at the time when Sea City wiped out our plan. Isn't it the second day after our weapons base was attacked? That woman must have come to our base." Si Kongchen's expression changed slightly. Then, he suddenly remembered the woman's untraceable movement technique at the Universal Base. The next second he gritted his teeth and said, "You suspect that it was that woman who took the information from me? That's my guess. Otherwise, how could it be so coincidental? That woman had just returned to her base, and Sea City could quickly set up a comprehensive arrest the next afternoon. And after that woman went back, Wu Qinghua still stayed in the universal base. I think it's very likely that he got the information from that woman, and then quickly returned to his base to deal with it. Listening to his analysis, Xikong Chen's face turned gloomy as he began to ponder. It seemed that Wei Haichao was right. The time that woman went back was too coincidental. And before she went back, Wu Qinghua was still in her base. Why did Wu Qinghua suddenly run back to Sea City as soon as she went back? There must be something wrong with this. Thinking about the cause and effect, the more he thought about it, the more likely it was. At this time, Wei Haichao spoke again. Also, hasn't this list been with you? It hasn't been passed to us. So why are you suspecting us? They don't have this list in their hands, so you shouldn't be suspecting them. Also, aren't these plans and blueprints all kept by you? You didn't keep them well, yet you want to blame us? However, he didn't dare to say this out loud. Otherwise, it might not be a good thing to make the other party angry. Chapter 1393. Although Wei Haichao didn't mention Xikong Chen, the hint in his words was obvious. Xikong Chen's face darkened. He gritted his teeth and glared at Wei Haichao for a while without saying anything. Wei Haichao didn't say anything either. He stood in front of the table with his hands behind his back. Bang! Xikong Chen suddenly slammed the table, and his expression became ferocious. Wei Haichao was startled and couldn't help but frown. He asked, "What's wrong?" Xikong Chen glared and said, "If that woman really took the list from me, then doesn't that mean she knows everything about our plan?" He put the list together with the plan. It didn't make sense for that woman to only look at the list and nothing else. Wei Haichao was stunned when he heard that. Then, she opened her mouth and said, "You mean?" Before he finished, there was a sudden rush of footsteps outside the door. The two of them turned to look at the door at the same time, and saw that Han Xiao, who had left not long ago, had returned. Han Xiao's expression was also very ugly. He said to the two as soon as he came in, "The people we sent to lead the underground creatures have been exposed. According to the news from Haicheng, the team we sent this time was ambushed before they could start the plan." Bang! Xikong Chen slammed his hand on the table again. This time it wasn't a slap. He slammed his fist on the table again. He slammed his fist on the table, causing everything on the table to tremble. After Xikong Chen slammed the table, he leaned against the back of the chair and collapsed. Then he raised his head, and raised a hand to press his forehead and eyes. Han Xiao looked at him in confusion. Seeing him like that, he turned to look at Wei Haichao. Wei Haichao said expressionlessly, "If it was just a guess, then it's confirmed now." Han Xiao looked at him in confusion and asked, "What do you mean?" Wei Haichao said to him, "Do you know who took the information away? Think about who destroyed the secret weapon base a few days ago. Think about the time she went back, and the time of the operation in Haicheng." As soon as he finished speaking, Han Xiao's eyes widened slightly. Then, as if realizing something, she looked at him and said, "You mean that woman?" Wei Haichao nodded. "Who else could it be? Could it be such a coincidence?" Han Xiao didn't say anything. After thinking for a while, he suddenly looked at Xikong Chen, who was pressing his eyes, and said, "But if she's here, why can't leader sense her presence? Even though she was a level 8 arcanist, she had only recently advanced, right? Even if he could completely conceal his aura, how could he not sense it at such a close distance?" Xikong Chen immediately put down his hand and looked at him coldly. "What do you want to say? Are you suspecting that I deliberately let her in?" "No, I wouldn't dare." Han Zhao's expression turned cold as he lowered his head and hurriedly replied. At this moment, Xikong Chen sat up, frowned, and waved his hand at the two of them. "All right, the two of you go and prepare for an urgent meeting at the base. Halt all operations immediately." Han Xiao and Wei Haichao looked at each other and left Xikong Li's office. They immediately went to make the necessary preparations. Since their entire plan had been exposed, it was no longer appropriate to resort to conspiracies. Since schemes didn't work, they would use open schemes. Their original plan was to reduce the consumption of weapons. Now that the situation had changed, since they couldn't reduce it anymore, they would use a more violent method. Lin Xiao quickly received the news that Lin Feng and Qiu Lily had successfully returned. Lin Feng, Qiu Lili, and Lin Kuei brought the report to Lin Xiao's office to report the situation. What do you think they used to lure those underground creatures? Lin Feng asked as the three of them sat around Lin Xiao's desk. Lin Xiao looked at the report in his hand that he deliberately refused to show her. She raised her eyebrows and said, if they wanted to lure them, they would have to use drugs to confuse their consciousness, if they didn't use what they wanted to eat the most. Anyway, Wuxia is good at this kind of trick. Lin Feng also raised his eyebrows at her. You should have used both methods. It's possible to use both. You're right, they used both methods at the same time. As he spoke, he looked at Qiu Lili and Lin Kuei and said, right? Qiu Lili nodded. She took out a glass bottle filled with red liquid and showed it to Lin Xiao. He showed it to Lin Xiao and said, look, this is what the Wuxia people used on the underground creatures. But before they had the chance to use it, we had already taken care of them. I used this medicine to test it out. The smell of the medicine will make the underground creatures go berserk and enter a state similar to the manic state of our metahumans. They've entered a state similar to the manic state of our previous paranormals. And their hunger has also increased by several stages. In other words, these exotic beasts were going berserk and hungry at the same time. An instinctive hunger and the madness of losing their minds were intertwined. At this time, keeping the food that they wanted to eat the most to attract them meant that they would chase after them desperately. Apart from this, they also brought a few cars of ordinary people over. It seems that after using the medicine on the underground creatures, they will use these people to attract them to the periphery of our base. Qiu Lili put the glass bottle on the table and continued to speak to Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao didn't look surprised. After all, she had already guessed this kind of trick. She leaned forward and took the bottle of medicine. She first put it under her nose and sniffed it before unscrewing the lid. There was a strange smell coming from the bottle. It wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't pleasant either. She squinted to look at the energy inside and found that there were two mixed colors of energy in the liquid. The two colors, fluorescent green and fluorescent purple, were mixed together and swam around like fluorescent liquid. She squinted at the energy and sniffed it again before putting the lid back on. The energy in the liquid has no effect on us zombies or humans. But the reason why the underground creatures reacted to it should be related to the energy in the bodies of the underground creatures. She studied the liquid and confirmed that it wasn't dangerous to them before speaking. There are about 1,000 people who were brought here as bait. There are ordinary people and metahumans among them. But the metahumans have been given medicine to suppress the energy of their abilities. They are inferior to ordinary people. Why does Wuxia always like to use living people as bait? What are the people in his base to him? Lin Feng frowned and said with dissatisfaction. Chapter 1394. Lin Feng wasn't the only one who didn't like the fact that Wuxia always used living people as bait. Even Lin Xiao frowned slightly. At a time when humans were rare, using living people as bait or experimental subjects was even more unacceptable than before the apocalypse. Have you asked about their identities in Wuxia? Who are they? Lin Xiao looked at Lin Feng and asked. Lin Feng nodded and said, actually, we don't need to ask to know that they are the people that Wuxia wants to get rid of. They are sick, hungry, weak, seriously injured, and so on. 90% of them are ordinary people. More than 100 of them are metahumans. They might have committed crimes and been sentenced to death. No matter who they were sent here. Since they were sent here, they wouldn't be able to go back alive. But the people from Wuxia didn't expect that Lin Xiao would know about their operation. Then he sent people to ambush them. That way, the people who were used as bait didn't die. Lin Feng and Qiu Lili brought them back to Wuxia base and sent them to Lin Hao's medical center for treatment. Lin Xiao said, yeah, looks like Lin Hao is going to be busy. Although not all of the thousands of people were sent to the medical center, at least half of them needed treatment. That's true. Anyway, he's not in the mood to find a wife. Let him be. Lin Feng first nodded his head, then ridiculed. As he spoke, he passed the operation report in his hand to Lin Xiao. In the afternoon, Xiedong suddenly appeared at the door of Lin Xiao's office. He walked in with a set of intelligence documents, his expression a little solemn. What's the matter? Lin Xiao saw his expression and couldn't help but ask. Xie Dong walked over and stood in front of her desk, handing her the report. He said, Sikong Chen has suspended all his plans. When Lin Xiao heard this, he handed over the information and opened it to take a look. After reading it, she didn't show any emotion on her face. Instead, she revealed a thoughtful expression. Seems like Sikong Chen already knows about Haicheng. But that's right, the people in Haicheng suddenly lost contact. He will definitely notice it. I believe he will soon receive the news that the underground creatures have failed. Hee. She smiled faintly. Just imagining Sikong Chen's expression made him feel good. Xie Dong looked at her expressionlessly and said, Not very soon, he has already received it. Lin Xiao looked at him with some surprise and said, Oh, he's quite timely. That's why he stopped all the plans. What he's going to do next is probably change the plan, Xie Dong said. Lin Xiao nodded. Then you definitely have to change it. If you find out that your plan has been discovered by the enemy, aren't you going to change? Since the effect of catching them off guard was gone, there was no point in taking action. I wonder how Sikong Chen is going to deal with us next. However, Lin Xiao was not worried that Sikong Chen would come up with a new plan. Since Sikong Chen already knew that his plan had been discovered by them, he would definitely think that they in Sea City would also strengthen their defenses. It was no longer possible for him to use underhanded methods, unless he used the hard way. I'll keep an eye on them, Xie Dong said. After Xie Dong left, Lin Xiao called Duan Wan in. He asked her, Haven't we interrogated the double agent who secretly provided us with information? Duan Wan shook her head. I didn't get any information, but that group of people has been caught. Could it be that the person isn't actually a member of their organization? Lin Xiao said in confusion. If he isn't a member of their organization, how could he know so much about those people? Duan Wan also showed a puzzled expression and said, Then why didn't he reveal his identity? Wouldn't he be exempted from the base's punishment this way? After catching Lu Meiqing and her group, Lin Feng had sent people to record their statements. At the same time, he also hinted to the person who provided him with the information not to wait. If he revealed his identity at this time, he would be able to get a lighter punishment. However, no one paid attention to his hint. Among the dozens of people, no one said that they were the person who provided them with accurate information. Lin Xiao couldn't help but ask curiously, Who is it? If he doesn't reveal his identity, then we can't get rid of this group of people. If they got rid of the other party as well, wouldn't it seem like their base was immoral and inhumane? After all, they had helped you. On the other side, Lin Xiao was keeping an eye on the movements in Wuxia while dealing with matters in the base. On the other side of Haicheng, Xiao Yunlong and Wu Chengyue were making a plan to rescue Li Yushan's brother. Of course, they did not cancel Li Yushan's punishment just because he was forced to betray the base. After all, you have done something wrong. No matter what your reason is, you have to bear the consequences of what you have done. So Li Yushan was locked up in prison. If he wanted to come out, it would depend on his performance inside. It was just that Li Yushan was disheartened and lifeless all day long. After a few days in prison, his beard was already unkempt, and he looked dispirited. One day, Xiao Liqing came to see him. Seeing him like this, he couldn't help but say to him, Do you have to be like this? Cheer up, otherwise who will take care of your brother when he comes back? Hearing him mention his brother, Li Yushan's face finally showed some reaction. He slowly raised his head and looked at Xiao Liqing with a pair of gray eyes. My brother, what do you mean? Xiao Liqing sat across the table from him and said, The leader is now trying to find a way to rescue your brother from Wuxia. So you have to be mentally prepared. Maybe you can see your brother again. Li Yushan was stunned at first, then his eyes suddenly lit up. Looking at Xiao Liqing's disbelief, he opened his mouth and asked, What you said is true? Is the leader really going to send people to save my brother? Why? Xiao Liqing sighed at him. You have been with the leader for so long. Don't you understand him? At work, he treats us as subordinates. But when did he really treat us as his subordinates? He's always treated us like brothers, including you. What's comforting is that you are not doing such a thing out of your own heart. Li Yushan looked at him quietly, and after a while, he slightly lowered his eyes. I know. But I can't watch my little brother die again without me knowing. I owe him several lives. Xiao Liqing nodded. Well, we all know about your matters. So aren't you thinking of a way? So don't look like you are waiting for death. Cheer up and wait for the good news. After saying this, Xiao Liqing left. Chapter 1395. But before Wu Qingyue and Xiao Yunlong could collect information about Li Yueshan's younger brother Li Yueha and design a rescue plan, strangely enough, someone sent over information about Li Yueha's location and his current situation. Xiao Yunlong looked at the information that Huang Ming brought over, looking at him blankly. Who gave it to you? Huang Ming shook his head. The other party sent you the information anonymously. When I found it, it was placed outside the security room at the entrance of the residential area where you live. I asked the security guards, and they all said they didn't know who put it there. When I checked the surveillance, I only saw a masked guy come over, and then quickly left. Xiao Yunlong looked at the information in his hand, becoming more and more silent. After a while, he put the information on the table. The other party not only sent news about Li Yueha, but also about Xikong Chen's change of plan. He thought for a moment, then said to Huang Ming, Go and verify this information to see if it's true. We have expected that Xikong Chen would change his plan. You should focus on verifying Li Yueha's information. Yes. Huang Ming nodded and went out. The next day, Huang Ming came back with the verified information. It's true. Li Yueha is indeed in Lu Jinan's laboratory, being studied on blood. His blood seemed to have undergone some kind of special change after being poisoned. Now, all the blood in his body contained a strange energy. Lu Jinan is using this energy to study something, but there doesn't seem to be any results. Huang Ming stood in front of Xiao Yunlong's desk and reported the current situation of Li Yueha. Xiao Yunlong frowned slightly when he heard this. Since Li Yueha was being used for this kind of research, then his body was definitely being carefully preserved and guarded. But after so many years, Lu Jinan still hasn't found anything, and he didn't know what was there to study. And this Li Yueha was still alive. It should be the mutation of his body that gave him a chance to survive. Who is it that leaked the information about China? What is the purpose? Is there a grudge against China? Or is it just to retaliate against Xikong Chen? Xiao Yunlong thought for a moment and asked. Huang Ming shook his head. He also couldn't figure out the other party's purpose. However, since the information sent by the other party was effective, if there wasn't any special reason, it might be that they wanted to disrupt Wuxia's operation. However, this didn't make sense. If it was just to take revenge on China or Xikong Chen, there was no need to investigate Li Yueha's information. Because in the Wuxia base, Lu Jinan and Hu Jiong had secretly experimented on more than one person. Or did the other party want them to rescue everyone who was being studied? But the other party didn't make such a request. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't figure it out. Although they had verified the authenticity of the information, they could not be sure that they would not be ambushed. Because he wasn't sure of the other party's intentions, he couldn't tell if there were any tricks involved. Then what do we do now? Huang Ming asked. Xiao Yunlong said, I need to discuss this matter with old Wu first. Then Xiao Yunlong took the information given by others to Wu Qingyue and told him the situation. Since they're kind enough to send us information, then no matter what, we'll have to deal with them. We still have to act, no matter what their intentions are. Even if it's a trap, we have to jump into it. If we don't even try, how can we save people? After Wu Qingyue understood the situation, he gave his opinion. What if the other party really has bad intentions? Xiao Yunlong asked worriedly. Wu Qingyue said, That depends on the adaptability of our own people. In other words, the people sent out this time must know how to adapt to sudden situations when they encounter any situation. But it was right to make several preparations. After all, under the preparation of several plans, there would always be a set of plans that would succeed. Then who are we going to send? Xiao Yunlong looked at Wu Qingyue and asked. Since they were going to sneak into the Wuxia base camp to save people, Then they certainly couldn't send ordinary people. Wu Qinghua thought for a moment and suddenly said, "Well, I'll borrow a few people from the universal base." When Xiao Yunlong heard that he wanted to borrow people from the universal base, he couldn't help but look at him in surprise. "Borrow who?" "Elmar, this guy is also an expert in stealth. And her ability to act has always been good. While going there to save people, we can also inquire about Xikong Chen's next plan," Wu Qinghua said with a smile. Xiao Yunlong nodded. "You think the same as me, but will Chief Lu be willing to lend us?" Wu Qinghua glanced at him. "Why not? It is also very important to inquire about information, not to mention that Xikong Chen already knows that his entire plan has been leaked. So wouldn't it be better if we can also know about his next change of plan?" Xiao Yunlong had nothing to say. So more than an hour later, Lin Xiao received a message from Wu Qinghua asking to borrow people. Elmar hadn't come back yet, and was still collecting energy nuclei for her these days. But she didn't object to Wu Qinghua's request. She thought about it, and asked Elmar to collect the latest information in Wuxia. Combined with the intelligence network that Xiadong had previously spread, they should be able to get deeper secret information. After thinking about it, she asked someone to call Qiu Lily over. "You go and replace Elmar, and ask her to come back. Then you follow Lin Kuei to continue her previous task. Collect a large number of energy nuclei, and send them back. I want to see how many level 5 and 6 paranormal Xikong Chen has to resist our zombie army." Qiu Lily didn't have any objection to the new task. Anyway, she happened to be free now. After coming out, Qiu Lily immediately went to find Lin Kuei. And Lin Kuei was staying at his sister Lin Jing's place eating. When Qiu Lily came, Lin Jing smiled and pulled her to the table to sit down. He said to her, "I heard that you guys at base 2 occasionally eat some special meat, so I went to Minister Chung to exchange some for you guys to try. I can't always eat while the 2 of you sit around doing nothing. I suddenly realized that I seem to be raising 2 big pets, thinking of getting food for you when I have nothing to do. Other people get cat food and dog food, but you call this zombie food?" Now Lin Jing, under the careful care of Lin Kuei, had become a lot more cheerful. Her entire body had also become plump. She no longer looked sallow and emaciated like before. She no longer looked sickly. The 2 zombies who were treated as pets. Qiu Lily looked at Lin Jing holding 2 clean plates of food for the 2 of them. It was raw meat, and it smelled like the meat had been soaked in Lin Xiao's space lake. It didn't smell much, but it had indeed become the basic food of the second base. Chapter 1396. Did you use your own points to exchange for it? Qiu Lily said to Ling Jing unhappily when she saw it. Ling Jing was also working in the medical center, because she used to go there often, because of her health. Later, after the adjustment, he got a job there, so that he could have a living condition in the base. With Lin Kuei around, she wouldn't starve to death. But she didn't want to be idle. She had to find something to do. However, she didn't earn many points in the medical center. Besides, the meat could have been brought over by her or Lin Kuei if they wanted to eat it. Qiu Lily pouted to express her unhappiness. But Ling Jing was happy, because it was the first time he made food for her and Lin Kuei. Therefore, he felt like he had finally become a parent. Seeing Ling Jing in a good mood, Lin Kuei didn't say anything. But he looked at the raw meat in front of him, then at Qiu Lily's. He thought about the cat food, dog food, and corpse food his sister mentioned. A strange feeling inexplicably flashed through his heart. Why did he feel like he really was a pet? Should he turn into a panther and eat it? "We have a mission in a while, so we're going out. This mission might take a few days, or even more than 10 days. Qiu Lily took the metal knife and fork Ling Jing prepared for her, inserted a piece of meat, and put it in her mouth elegantly. He only said that after he finished eating. "Is there another mission? You guys have been on a lot of missions recently." Ling Jing was stunned for a moment before he said calmly. Qiu Lily nodded. "Yes, because it's been a busy period." She was referring to Xikong Chen and Wuxia. Lin Kuei picked up the meat with his chopsticks. Qiu Lily suddenly found that her cutlery was different from Lin Kuei's. She asked Ling Jing in confusion, Hey, why is he using chopsticks but I have a knife and fork? She wasn't a Westerner. Ling Jing smiled and said, Yes, I thought you would look good with a knife and fork. So I prepared a knife and fork for you. Qiu Lily was speechless. Was he complimenting her? After the meal, Qiu Lily and Lin Kuei left Lin Jing's house to look for Elmarch. When he found Elmar's place, Elmar was leading a group of people to besiege a level 7 zombie. Basically, she was the main attacker while the other rank first kings harassed her from the side. Bang! Even if they had more people on their side, Elmar was still sent flying to the wall. Because this level 7 zombie was an assault-type metal type, the evil aura on its body was very strong, and its whole body reeked of blood and stench. There was not only the scent of mutated beasts in the blood, but also the scent of humans. This was a zombie king that wasn't picky with its food, because it even ate animals. Generally, zombies were not interested in animals, especially mutated beasts. Moreover, when it was in battle, it had a special skill, which was to absorb the surrounding metal to its body. Then it melted and compressed into a thick layer of armor that was impervious to swords and spears. Elmar was at the same level as it. Even if she shape-shifted and used her claws to scratch it, it would be blocked by this layer of armor. Moreover, the opponent's strength was not bad either. His reaction and attack were both very strong. Therefore, Elmar fell into a bitter battle, wasting time with the opponent. Moreover, she was not the one who found this level 7 zombie first. It was the opponent who found her first. Maybe it was attracted by the same level of its own kind. In the eyes of these wild zombies, if they met someone of the same level, it was either you die or I die. Anyway, both sides wanted to devour each other's zombie core to strengthen themselves. Not to mention that this level 7 zombie had a very high IQ. She knew that it was not easy to find someone of the same level as her. So now that she met it, she would not let it go. Wow, so miserable. Qiu Lily threw a fireball at the level 7 metal type zombie as soon as she arrived, then jumped to Elmar's side and bent down to look at her. She and Lin Kuei had sensed the energy of this level 7 zombie from afar. Therefore, they had concealed their own energy and sneaked over. And this level 7 zombie was fighting fiercely with Elmar, so it did not notice the other two zombies of the same level coming from afar. Therefore, after Qiu Lily and Lin Kuei concealed their energy, it was even more impossible to detect them. Pfft, I can still fight with it. Elmar climbed out of the wall with a dirty face, spat out 2 mouthfuls of sand, stood up and said. Then she looked at her confusedly. Huh? Why are you two here? While they were talking, Lin Kuei had already turned into a big black panther, and was fighting with the level 2 metal type king. Xiao Xiao asked us to come. She said that she wanted to swap you back. There is another task for you. Qiu Lily looked at her, then raised her hand, and waved a super hot fireball. Oh, that's good. I'll bring this level 7 corpse core back as well. Let the leader use its zombie core to add another level 2 king to our army. After Elmar used her claws to wipe the dust off her face, she did not know that the more she wiped, the worse it got. She flicked her tail and went invisible, then quietly sneaked behind the metal-type zombie. After the sudden appearance of Qiu Lily and Lin Kuei, the level 7 metal-type zombie was obviously stunned. When it saw the 3 of them attacking it together, it immediately felt a sense of danger, so it turned around and wanted to run. However, it was thrown back by Elmar, who had already sneaked behind it with her big tail. Elmar's lizard tail was very powerful. The metal-type zombie that was thrown back was pressed down by the Black Panther. Then it opened its mouth and bit its neck. Crack! Although the Black Panther's teeth were very sharp, it could only bite through the metal-type zombie's thick outer layer of metal armor. It could not bite the inside of its neck. If they wanted to break through its armor, they would need to exhaust the energy of its zombie core or burn it with a high temperature. After being burned for a long time, steel would become soft. But that would take some time. As a result, 2 animal type and 1 long-range attacker. The 3 of them surrounded a defense-type attacker. In the end, while Elmar and Lin Kuei patted it with their claws like a ball, Qiu Lily kept burning it, increasing the consumption of its energy. Because it had to resist Qiu Lily's super hot melting, It needed the energy in its own zombie core to maintain. In the end, it was killed when it had no energy to maintain its ability and could not turn into metal. Sigh, the energy in the zombie core has been consumed a lot. After digging out the zombie core, Elmar said with some dissatisfaction. For zombies that had consumed all their energy, the energy in the zombie core would be much weaker after death. However, for a level 6 king, it was still a very strong energy. Chapter 1397. It took 3 of them to kill a level 7 zombie. Of course, if it wasn't a metal-type zombie, it would have been easier. Elmar took the level 2 zombie core and a bunch of level 5 and 6 zombie cores back to the base. When she found Lin Xiao, she put the 30 zombie cores on her table. Here's what we got. Lin Xiao looked and was surprised. Huh? There's a level 7 zombie? Normally, Elmar, as a level 2 king, shouldn't be able to kill a zombie of the same level. Elmar nodded. Yes, Lily and the others came. This guy came to find me. If it was me, I wouldn't be able to kill it. Lin Xiao nodded and looked at it. Seeing that it was a metal type, she put it aside and said, Metal type? We have a few level 6 metal type zombies. Who should I give it to? Old Gua, Old 8, Mo. And the 2 metal type zombies in the army. There were 5 people in total. The first one to follow her was Old Gua. Should she give it to him? Elmar didn't say anything. It didn't matter who she gave it to. In the end, Lin Xiao thought about it and gave the level 7 metal corpse core to Old Gua. After all, this old man was the first metal-type zombie to follow her. Oh right, Lily said I have a new mission. Seeing that Lin Xiao had decided to give the level 7 metal-type zombie core to someone, she asked what her new mission was. Lin Xiao nodded. Yes, Ocean City borrowed a few people from me. I want you to lead a team and work with them. You have 2 missions. The first is to cooperate with Ocean City and save someone. The second is to gather information about Sikong Chen's next action plan. Find out how he plans to deal with Ocean City and us. Elmar looked at her curiously. Save someone? Save who? Lin Xiao looked at her and said, You know Li Yushan, right? He's one of the spies in Ocean City. But he has a brother who is controlled by China. Do you understand what I mean? Of course, Elmar knew what was going on. If his brother was controlled by China, then he must have been threatened. Plus, although Elmar wasn't familiar with Li Yushan, she knew of his existence. Oh, so Li Yushan has a younger brother. Elmar looked at Lin Xiao in surprise and asked. Lin Xiao nodded. Yes, that's what C-City said. They said that Li Yushan's brother is being experimented on in China's laboratory. Elmar frowned. Another experiment? This Wuxia is really. Why don't they use people as bait or experiment on them? Lin Xiao smiled and said, Soon, he will know the consequences of using people as bait and experiments. This time, the group of people that Lin Feng and the rest had brought back were important witnesses. Moreover, Haiqing's rescue this time was not just a simple rescue mission. When Sikong Chen and the rest were doing these things, the 2 million survivors in China did not know about it. If this news were to spread to their base, it would be up to Sikong Chen to deal with it. As a base for human survivors, they used humans as experiments or used them as bait. This went against the original purpose of building the base. Elmar's eyes flashed as she looked at her with uncertainty. She asked, Hey, you mean you want to make the first move? A cold light flashed in Lin Xiao's eyes as she said, Do you think I will allow them to keep harassing my base like this? We have to fight back. But Sikong Chen mainly wants to deal with Haiqing. There are Wu Qingyue and Xiao Yunlong there. This time, he knows that his plan has been exposed, so he will definitely make a new plan. He was the one who taught us how to stab people in the back. This is called an eye for an eye. When Elmar heard her words, her expression froze. She couldn't help but ask, But if we do this, won't there be enough time? I'm sure he's going to implement a new plan soon. Lin Xiao said to her meaningfully, How much time does this need? It doesn't take too much time to spread the news. All you need to do is expose his laboratory when you go there, and let the people that Lin Feng brought back as bait testify for you. These people should also hate Sikong Chen very much now. After all, Anyone would have hatred in their heart after being treated like this. Especially among the paranormals. Many of them were originally dissatisfied with Wuxia or knew about the shady business that Si Kong-chun had done behind the scenes. That was why they were arrested and sentenced to death. Elmar's eyes lit up as she said, "You want to make Si Kong-chun's base fall into chaos when he brings his army to attack Haiqing?" This was indeed very similar to the method that Si Kong-chun used to spread the virus in Haiqing. That afternoon, Elmar brought 5 level 1 kings to Haiqing. These newly promoted level 1 kings were all Logia types. Logia types were very good at concealment, so they were very suitable for this small operation. Elmar brought Lin Xiao's plan to Wu Chengyue. After seeing it, Wu Chengyue expressed his full support. Lin Xiao, Lin Feng, and Yuan Tianxing also began to discuss the operation plan. Now Lin Feng was in charge of persuading the victims that Lin Feng brought back. As the saying goes, the enemy of an enemy is a friend. The victims who came out of Wuxia agreed to it without hesitation. Of course, not all of them, because half of them were still lying in the infirmary. Recently, Lin Wenwen had completely become Yuan Tianxing's assistant, because Lin Xiao forced the two to work together. Lin Wenwen would always be unable to control himself from taking care of Yuan Tianxing. He worked very hard to check the information for Yuan Tianxing, and took care of Yuan Tianxing's daily life. Yuan Tianxing's body had yet to recover, and he lacked energy. Even if he could work, he could not work as hard as he used to. Although he wanted to, Lin Wenwen was now by his side openly, and was very strict with his working hours and rest time. This made Yuan Tianxing somewhat at a loss as he did not know what to do. Although his heart did not want to cooperate with what Lin Wenwen said, his body was very cooperative. He said he was tired, he said he was paralyzed, and he said he had no strength. Therefore, with his body crippled, what else could he say? "Okay, it's dinner time. Put down the document in your hand." Just when he thought that he was almost a cripple, he heard Lin Wenwen's voice coming from the door. Yuan Tianxing said helplessly, "I say, can you let me finish reading the document in my hand?" Yuan Tianxing, who was used to finishing his work to a certain extent, was really not used to being called up on time to eat when it was time. Lin Wenwen glanced at him coldly. "No, eating well is also to help you recover faster. You know that your body needs rest, so don't take your body lightly." Chapter 1398. Do you think I'm being a busybody? You have to know that you're working for my sister. If you're really crippled, then wouldn't my brother have to increase his workload? So even if you want to work hard, you have to have a body that can work first. Lin Wenwen nagged as she placed the food in the lunchbox on the coffee table in his office. Then she stood up straight and turned to look at him. Under her piercing gaze, Yuan Tianxing surrendered in less than 3 seconds every time. When he came over to eat, Lin Wenwen walked to his desk and looked at the documents he had been reading. She found that it was a new action plan for the Wuxia Empire. After she finished reading the plan, she said, "It seems that Si Kong-chun went for wool and came home shorn." Yuan Tianxing dragged a chair over and sat in front of the coffee table. He picked up his bowl and chopsticks and began to eat. As he ate, he said, "Si Kong-chun reaped what he sowed." Did he really think that he could annex other bases just because he had more weapons and more troops than others? He wanted to control all the bases in the country. He had a lot of ideas, but he used them in the wrong place. Recently, Si Kong-chun's actions had become bolder and bolder, and he had become more and more undisguised. His ambition was exposed everywhere. If he could put his ideas outside of the major bases and the peaceful coexistence of humans, perhaps the future development of humans would be faster. He didn't think about how to improve the survival of the people in his base. He didn't think about what kind of life the next generation of humans would have to live. Instead, he thought about dealing with other bases all day long. He really didn't know if there was something wrong with his brain. Lin Wenwen looked at him and said, "Everyone's ideas are different, and everyone wants different things. You can't force your own ideas onto others. Anyway, if some people want to die, then let them go. In any case, you can pull back his body, but you can't pull back his heart that wants to die." After saying that, she put down the plan in her hand and began to organize the documents on Yuan Tianxing's desk. He separated the ones that he hadn't dealt with, and those that he had dealt with. Seeing her movements, Yuan Tianxing knew that his work for the night could only be delayed until tomorrow. After dinner, he had to go home and sleep. He couldn't sneak his work back with him. Elmar brought her people to Haiqing to meet up with her team, before heading to China for a mission. Lin Xiao stayed in the base to deal with the underworld creatures. At the same time, he had to level up a large number of zombies at night. With Qiu Lily and Lin Kuei replacing Elmar, the 2 level 7 zombies managed to get 1.5 times more energy nuclei. Over the past 2 days, more and more energy cores have been sent back. At this time, Mo Yen, who hadn't appeared for a long time, returned to the base with his female zombie. His level had also been restored to level 7. It had stabilized. Hey, I thought you had forgotten what we talked about. Lin Xiao looked at the male zombie in front of him with a crooked mouth and said, this guy's face was still very pleasing to the eye, if it wasn't for the weird smile on his face that ruined his facial features. On Mo Yan's perfect face, his long hair was messy, and a few strands of fringe hung down in front of his forehead. He was dressed in black, and sat on the sofa in Lin Xiao's office. His long legs were crossed on the coffee table. The female zombie in the white dress stood beside him like a bodyguard. What? Don't you welcome me back? Mo Yin looked at Lin Xiao and smiled at her. This smile looked even more evil, like the prince of the demon world. His aura was still very strong, although he hadn't recovered to his peak. But now that he had recovered to level 7, he had some confidence. Lin Xiao shrugged. It doesn't matter if you come back or not. Anyway, when I need you, I will send people to find you. I came back to know, when are you going to take care of those people from China? And I have a request. Can you leave Xikong Li's life for me to kill him? Mo Yin looked at her and said. Lin Xiao was curious. Why leave him to you? Does he have a grudge against you? Suddenly, she thought of something and her eyes flashed. Then she asked, could it be him too? Mo Yin nodded at her, killing intent flashed in his eyes. Yeah, if he didn't eat my flesh, would it be that easy for him to reach level 8? Lin Xiao finally understood. That's fine, as long as he dies. It doesn't matter who does it. But with your current strength, I'm afraid you can't kill him, right? Although he was a very strong lightning element, he didn't even know if he could win against the level 8 fire element Xikong Chen, with his current level 7, let alone kill him. However, Mo Yin raised his eyebrows at her and smiled. Who said I'm going to deal with him alone? You can help me beat him half to death, then I'll finish him off. Lin Xiao was speechless. So this guy wanted her to be his damage output, and help him cut off all his HP first, leaving the remaining HP for him to finish him off? Anyway, when you beat him half to death, you'll be tired. Then I'll help you clean up. As long as he's dead, it doesn't matter who comes. Seeing Lin Xiao's face turn black, Missouri Yin continued to smile at her. Then I might as well use a big skill, and kill him cleanly. Lin Xiao rolled her eyes and said, since you want me to help you fight, then you should at least give me some benefits, right? Is this enough? Mo Yin was silent for a while, then suddenly reached out to the female zombie behind him. Then the female zombie in the white dress put her small black bag in his hand. Mo Yin opened the zipper of the very feminine small bag, and put it on the coffee table. He didn't know what method he used, but when the small bag was closed, Lin Xiao didn't feel anything. However, as soon as he opened it, several energy auras suddenly spread out from the bag. Lin Xiao sensed that the bag was filled with energy cores. From the aura, there were zombie cores, mutant plant cores, mutant beast cores, etc. Looking at the bulging small bag, there must be a lot of them. There are a total of 193 energy cores, zombie, plant, mutant, beast cores. There are 3 level 7 cores, but they are all plant cores. 38 level 6 cores, 152 level 5 cores. Mo Yin put the bag on the table, and leaned on the sofa while looking at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao looked at the bag and nodded. That's enough. Mo Yan's handsome face smiled at her again. Then, he raised his hand and combed the hair in front of his forehead coquettishly. Then he asked, oh, by the way, do you have a good hairdresser here? I want to cut my hair. Lin Xiao was speechless. In the end, She let this guy go to the plantation to find Lu Jun to cut his hair. Chapter 1399. For the sake of this small bag of energy cores, Lin Xiao agreed to let Mo Yin deal the final blow to Xikongchen. On the other side, Elmar and Haiqing's people went to rescue Li Yushan's brother Li Yuhe. Kong Qingming also sent a dozen level 4 and 5 subordinates. Their strength was much weaker than Elmar's side. Although Elmar only had 6 people, they had 1 level 7 and 5 level 6, and they were all zombies. Their combat power was all over there. Your leader is really generous. It's one thing if you come, but you actually sent 5 level 6. Are level 6 cabbages over there? So cheap? Kong Qingming said to Elmar when he saw her. Elmar glanced at him and said, "You don't like it? Then I'll send them back to exchange for a few level 5 ones? You're right, our base doesn't lack level 5 or 6 ones. They already had a bunch of level 7 ones." Kong Qingming immediately shook his head. No, these are fine. These are suitable, no need to change. So they got on the car and quietly left Haiqing. In order to cultivate tacit understanding for this mission, the people from both bases sat together. Oh right, how do you plan to deal with Li Yushan? After all, he also did that kind of thing. Elmar was a bit curious, so she asked Kong Qingming, who was in the front passenger seat. Kong Qingming tilted his head and said to her, He'll be locked up for at least a few more years. But it depends on his performance. If he can make up for his crime, his sentence will be reduced accordingly. Make up for his crime? Elmar looked at him with a bit of confusion. Kong Qingming said, if we can successfully bring his brother back, then he'll be able to settle his heart. So in this war with China, he can still go on missions. Elmar nodded. Oh, so they'll still give him a chance, right? Kong Qingming nodded. Of course, he can only move outside when he's on a mission. After the war is over, he'll be judged again based on his merits. Our base is very humane. All the rules are judged based on the severity of the case. We're not as cold-blooded and heartless as China. If it was in China, such a crime wouldn't even have a chance to make up for his crime. You would be executed immediately. China did not care whether your motive was voluntary or coerced. How do you think Xikongchen will deal with us next? His plot has already been seen through by us, and we've even ruined his plans twice in a row. Do you think he will hate us? Elmar asked him at this time. Kong Qingming said, Oh, he hates your leader very much now. I only hate your leader. When Elmar heard this, she realized that Xikongchen only hated their leader. Why? Kong Qingming smiled and said, You probably don't know, but this Xikongchen has already guessed that the information he leaked was found out by your leader. So these 2 operations were intercepted, because your leader brought back his secret plans, right? At that time, he was so angry that his face turned from green to black. It was as if the whole world owed him. Our leader reckons that his next operation will mainly target our base, but he won't let your base off either. Hearing that Xikongchen was so angry that his face turned green and black, Elmar laughed coldly and said, Serves him right. If you don't want people to know, then don't do it. He was the one who wanted to harm people, but he didn't allow people to resist. Speaking up to this point, she paused for a moment and then said, Oh right, how confident are you in your rescue plan? Do you know the details of the mission location? Do you have the blueprints? Kong Qingming took a copy and handed it to her. I originally wanted to tell you in detail over there, but I'll let you take a look first. Elmar opened it and looked at it carefully. There were 2 copies of the map. One was the overall map of China's base, and the other was the building structure of the target location. There were also various hints, and the location of Li Yueshan's brother. Looking at the details of the target location, Elmar was a little surprised and asked Kong Qingming, This map of the target location is very detailed. And this information is all confidential, right? How did you get it? Only an insider who is very familiar with the situation could get this information, right? Kong Qingming's beautiful face smiled and said, You can see that too. It seems that you learned a lot in your base. That's right, someone did provide this information. We also sent people to verify it seriously, and it's all true. From what you said, it was provided by someone else. I thought that you had already sent people to infiltrate, and now it's the right time to send the information back. When Elmar heard this, she guessed that this information was not obtained by their people. And it's indeed not from our side, Kong Qingming replied. She didn't know if it was because he had a girlfriend, but Kong Qingming's temperament became a little more robust. His face also looked a lot more masculine. It was no longer like before, where it was hard to distinguish between a man and a woman, especially now that he had a crew cut. Someone provided you with information? Who is it? Elmar asked subconsciously. I don't know. The other party didn't reveal their identity, Kong Qingming replied. Elmar frowned slightly. It can't be a trap, right? After all, this kind of unknown information wasn't very safe. Kong Qingming turned back and said to her, we had the same suspicions at the beginning, but we couldn't think of the other party's motive. So we have to be prepared for this mission. This is a trap. Stay alert and act according to the situation. You guys are really reckless. Elmar couldn't help but complain to him. Just like this, they arrived at a place more than 10 kilometers away from the Wuxia base, then temporarily found a hidden place to stop. Then they began to discuss the plan of action. Kong Qingming took out the map that he gave to Elmar and said, we will split into 3 teams and have 3 plans. We will first try Plan A. We will first go in to save people, and after that, we will gather information on Sikongchen's next step. The first plan is to trouble you to bring your team, and summon a small zombie tied outside of Wuxia, create chaos, and divert their attention. Then I will bring people to infiltrate the target location. If our infiltration fails, then we will use Plan B. We will directly attack. If it doesn't work, then we can only use the last plan. When Elmar saw that he stopped, she asked, what's the last plan? Kong Qingming stared at her and said, the last plan is for you to sneak in and save people yourself. So if the first plan fails, then you can only rely on yourself. We can only cover for you from outside. Elmar. She inexplicably felt that they were waiting for her. Chapter 1400. Sikongchen was in a meeting with the others in the conference room, thinking about whether they should attack Haicheng or something else. If they wanted to attack Haicheng, they would need a proper reason. His original plan was to secretly control the underground creatures to attack Haicheng, and then spread the virus in Haicheng. Then he would use the crime of breaking the rules to attack Haicheng. Of course, this breaking the rules could be blamed on Haicheng. Anyway, as long as the virus was leaked, they would have to bear the consequences. What reason do you have to suppress Haicheng? Your original plan has already been seen through. You can't attack them for no reason. Wei Haichao looked at the others, and then at Sikongchen. Sikongchen's face had been dark recently. He said coldly, what reason do I need? There's no need. The others were slightly startled. They glanced at him, and then revealed a thoughtful expression. You're thinking of not using a reason? Just attack. Lu Jinan looked at him and said. Everyone looked at Sikongchen. Sikongchen snorted. That's right. Why do we have to use a reason? You guys came up with all kinds of plans before. But haven't they all been seen through? Let's use force. Let's see if they have the same strength as us. But won't this cause opposition from the other bases? It will also cause resentment among the survivors in our base. What if they cause trouble? Han Xiao said that this might not be appropriate. The other bases want to oppose? They won't be able to do so soon. Who will oppose? Black Dragon? Qingshan base? Ming Clan? Or Sentient base? What power do they have to oppose us? As for the survivors in our base, it's okay. There are too many people in our base. The food produced by the soilless cultivation isn't enough to feed them. Since they don't want to stay in China, then let them scram. Sikongchen raised his eyebrows and said expressionlessly. Wei Haichao turned his head to look at the expressions of the others, and after thinking for a moment he said, that's not bad, we can spend less effort. I don't think it's bad. At this moment, an officer with the rank of squad leader walked over quickly from outside the conference room and reported something to Wei Haichao's assistant at the door of the conference room. When Wei Haichao's assistant heard this, his expression froze. Then he quietly pushed open the door of the conference room. Without disturbing the leader's meeting, he silently walked behind Wei Haichao, bent down, and whispered into his ear. When his assistant came in, Wei Haichao had already noticed it. When he finished listening, he immediately frowned. Then he turned his head and looked at his assistant with a puzzled look. The assistant nodded. Seeing that Wei Haichao was silent for a few seconds, he waved his hand at him and turned to leave the conference room. Although his actions were very light, the people in the conference room were all leaders. No one would not notice his arrival. Therefore, when he left, everyone's eyes focused on Wei Haichao. After all, in this meeting, if it wasn't a very important situation, these assistants wouldn't directly come in to report to them. Instead, they could wait until they were done with the meeting. After Wei Haichao dismissed his men, he raised his head and looked at everyone. Then he said, "They said there was a group of zombies outside the west gate, but they didn't react to the drugs we drove out. They might be controlled by high-level zombies. Did the corpse repellent not work? How big is it?" Sikongchen couldn't help but feel annoyed when he heard that the special drug developed by his base to drive out zombies didn't work. He frowned and asked like Wei Haichao. Recently, his actions had been ruined, and nothing good had happened. Now they said that the corpse repellent that was effective before had lost its effect again. All the things that could ruin his mood were squeezed together. Wei Haichao said, "There are at least tens of thousands of zombies, and they are rushing to the base without any scruples. I don't know what's going on, but I can guess that it might be controlled by a level 2 king. Generally, if there were tens of thousands of zombies that could control the consciousness of low-level zombies, then there would at least be a level 2 king. Only these high-level zombies would ignore the corpse repellent they had scattered within a few kilometers of the base." Sikongchen suddenly stood up. "I'll go and see what kind of level 2 king zombies dare to provoke us." After saying that, he put on his military hat, turned around, and strode out of the conference room in his thick military boots. It just so happened that he had been suppressing a bellyful of anger recently. He originally wanted to vent it on Haiching, but he didn't expect that someone would come knocking on his door. "That's great. I'll just treat it as an appetizer." Seeing Sikongchen walk out with the repressed aura, everyone looked at each other. They all shrugged their shoulders and stood up to follow him out. Wei Haichao looked at Han Xiao and said with his eyes, "He's too angry recently." Han Xiao looked back at him. "This level 2 king is going to be unlucky." Wei Haichao nodded. At this time, outside the base, Elmar was standing at the back of the zombie tide with her people. She would roar from time to summon all the zombies nearby. Moreover, Elmar had recently developed a new ability, which was to summon zombie beasts. Perhaps it was because of her Zoan ability. If she transformed into her beast form, there would be another kind of sound wave in her roar, which could attract those zombie beasts. The zombie beast's mobility had always been much more agile than humans who had turned into zombies. The zombie horde that was summoned by Elmar approached the direction of China's base from afar. Anyway, she didn't really intend to let these zombies attack China's base. She just wanted to create a commotion, bluff, and at the same time, create a diversion. Therefore, while Elmar was constantly summoning zombies to scare China, Kong Qingming had already led his people and successfully infiltrated China's base with the help of the undercover agent that they had previously planted in China. Then, they quickly sneaked towards Li Yuhi's location. The research institute that Li Yuhi was in was previously managed by Hu Zhiyong. Later, after Hu Zhiyong courted his own death, Lu Jinan took over the supervision. However, Lu Jinan's mind was mainly on his own research institute, and he didn't pay much attention to the original one that Hu Zhiyong was in charge of. However, for Kong Qingming and the others, it was just right. Chapter 1401. Without Hu Zhiyong's control, Lu Jinan was not concerned. Therefore, most of the authority of this experimental research institute was in the hands of a deputy director. After all, under Hu Zhiyong, he knew the experimental research institute the best, and his research skills were not worse than Hu Zhiyong's. He only lacked a bit of special ability talent. Kong Qingming followed the signs on the map, and mixed in through a hidden underground passage on the side. Everyone was fully armed and sneaked in with 120% of their concentration. In the end, they sneaked in for a long time, but they did not find any danger at all. Yes, nothing. They walked to the surveillance camera, but the surveillance camera was turned off. They walked to the corridor outside, but there was no one in the corridor. They walked stealthily in the corridor for a few minutes, but no one passed by them. Logically speaking, this was the experimental area. How could there be no one? The more they walked in, the more Kong Qingming felt something was wrong. It was so smooth. Could it really be a trap? Even his team members showed hesitation in their eyes and stared at him from time to time. Boss, this was too smooth. Why did it feel wrong? Kong Qingming replied with a hand gesture. I also feel something is wrong. Everyone be careful. Why did we not see anyone after walking for so long? Moreover, all the surveillance cameras they passed by were turned off. This was too obvious. His map did not say that the surveillance cameras in these areas would be turned off at this time. Could it be that someone was really waiting for him inside? Did the other party want them to sneak in smoothly and use this method to lower their vigilance? Then, when they arrived at Li Yuehe's location, all kinds of ambushes would be waiting for them, right? Thinking of this, Kong Qingming was a little hesitant to continue walking down, or just use the second plan. But the enemy didn't even have a person, even if they wanted to attack. There was not even an obstacle. How could this be considered an attack? Or rush to the target point and fight to the death with the other party, then take advantage of the chaos to rescue the person? Seeing Kong Qingming stop, the other team members stared at him, waiting for his next decision. Looking at their hesitant looks, the person who had been hiding in the dark waiting for them to take the people away was so anxious that he wanted to take a stick and chase them in like chasing ducks. Oh no, he should have taken out a 40-meter-long broadsword to chase them away. I've already helped you get rid of all the obstacles. Hurry up and go save them. What the hell was he hesitating for? Don't tell me you want me to chase you away? So, just as Kong Qingming was hesitating about whether to take his people out or not, an exasperated man's voice suddenly came from the surrounding speakers. I say? Can you hurry up if you want to save him? What was the meaning of stopping here? Fuck, if you guys want to go back just like that, I'll chase you all the way to Sea City and kill you. Why do you think I helped you guys open up all the passages? I'm putting my life on the line for doing this, okay? If you return it now, I'm talking about you. You look like the leader. Why do you look like you're retarded? If he didn't want to save them, then he had to hurry up and take them away. Don't make me waste so much effort to help you today. Kong Qingming and the others who were suddenly scolded by an unknown person. Holy shit. That scared them to death, alright? Just when they thought that no one in their team knew about them, someone suddenly appeared out of nowhere and started scolding them. And he even scolded them for dawdling. This was too much of a test of their heart's endurance. Like a ghost. So when Kong Qingming and the others suddenly heard a clear voice pointing at them and scolding them from the speakers, everyone was dumbfounded. So when they heard the other party say that there was a retarded expression on his face, they subconsciously looked around. Finally, everyone's eyes focused on Kong Qingming's face. Kong Qingming, hurry up. I've only given your area half an hour to rest. We'll start moving soon. You guys have to hurry to Area D, it's safe there now. Go quickly. If you dare to leave again, I'll give you laxatives later and let your legs go weak. Kong Qingming and the others. Why should I believe you? Kong Qingming, who had finally calmed down, finally regained his senses. He looked up at the speaker above the walkway and asked, I'm asking you guys to save him because of my friendship with him. If it wasn't for the fact that it's inconvenient for me to send him away, I wouldn't have to pass the information to you guys. Alright, you guys don't need to know this. You just need to know that I won't harm this Li Yuehe. If you guys don't believe me, fine. Then you guys withdraw now, and I'll move Li Yuehe to another place. I'll let you guys sneak in and look for him again. If you find him, you win. The mysterious person snorted coldly, and then expressed his disdain for Kong Qingming. Kong Qingming turned his head and looked at the others. After thinking about it, He decided to believe this person's words for the time being. Then, he immediately gestured for everyone to move forward at full speed, and left the place with everyone. Although he didn't believe the other party's words in his heart, if there was a 1% chance that what the other party said was true, then they had to take a gamble. If they were really fooled, it didn't matter. Anyway, there was still Elmar outside. She would bring people to sneak in to meet them later. If she found that they had fallen into the trap, she would come to save them first. Seeing that Kang Qingming finally moved toward Li Yuehe with his people, the person behind the speaker breathed a sigh of relief. And when Kang Qingming quickly led his people toward Li Yuehe's direction, there were indeed no more obstacles. However, they still maintained their vigilance, always on guard against any sudden changes in their surroundings. However, there wasn't. Until they arrived in front of Li Yuehe's laboratory, everything was safe and sound. Kang Qingming was still looking around, and then he was about to study how to open the door of this laboratory. The person next to him suddenly reached out and tapped his shoulder. He turned his head, and saw that the other party pointed to a corner on the frame of the door that couldn't be seen by the surveillance cameras. There was actually a notice posted on it. "The door is open, directly push the door open." Kang Qingming. He didn't know how to describe what he saw. It was like a warning label for passers-by. Did the other party think they were here for a vacation? And even posted a notice? Although he was complaining in his heart, Kang Qingming still carefully twisted the door handle. At the same time, he wondered if this notice was fake. Would it sound an alarm if he twisted it? In the end, it didn't. The door opened. Chapter 1402. Kang Qingming was still thinking about whether the notice was a lie, but when he twisted the door handle, the door opened silently. The surroundings were still quiet. There was no reaction. He immediately opened the door and went in. Then the others also followed, leaving 2 people to guard the door. After entering the laboratory, they found that except for the door, it was closed. In the middle of the room, there was a bed against the wall. On the bed was a bald man with his eyes closed. The man's head was full of all kinds of wires. His mouth and nose were covered with a respirator, quietly lying there. His hands that were exposed outside the quilt were also covered with some catheters. The catheters were still flowing with liquid. The man was as thin as firewood, 2 deep eye sockets. But it can be seen that the original appearance also had regular facial features. And he looked very similar to Li Yushan. There was no need to guess whether he was a fake or not. Pada, if you want to directly pull out these catheters in his body, in less than a minute, his life will be over. At this time, the man's voice came from a small speaker in the corner of the ceiling of the laboratory. Then what should I do? Kang Qingming stood by the bed. He really did not dare to move. Originally, he wanted to directly take the person away. Even if he died, he could take his body back to the base and turn him into a zombie. At least he wouldn't be tormented here as a test subject, or thrown out to feed the zombies one day. Now hearing this mysterious man's voice, the other party wanted him to take the living Li Yushan away. Go to the position on the left side of the bed. Reach out to the bed board above the bottom of the bed. There is a bottle of medicine and a research report there. The medicine will temporarily suppress the poison in his body, but only for 3 days. Then you can follow the information on this report to collect the things he needs to maintain his life. Then it will depend on the ability of the medical scholars on your side. After the mysterious man finished, he turned off the speaker with a beep sound. Obviously, he did not intend to communicate with Kang Qingming and the others. Kang Qingming did as he said, and sure enough, he found a bag of things on the lower left side of the bed. It was taped there. After tearing it off, he opened the bag inside, and sure enough, there was a bottle of liquid and a research report. He couldn't understand this kind of research report, so he passed it to someone else. The man took the report and quickly read it with a flashlight. Then he looked up and nodded at Kang Qingming. Kang Qingming did not let Li Yuehe consume the potion. After all, he did not know the identity of that person, nor did he know their intentions. You can't just go with what others say, right? Although he did help him find the person successfully, he still had to be wary of whether this was a trap. Anyway, now that Li Yueha had been found, they did not come unprepared. Kong Qingming took out another bottle of medicine, then took out Li Yueha's breathing apparatus, and fed it to him. Regarding Li Yueha's situation, Li Yueshan had already started to investigate Li Yueha's situation and his body's data after he found out that his brother was still alive. Although he couldn't bring back his brother's entire body, he could retrieve his body's data. Li Yueshan was an intelligence officer. He naturally had his own channels to obtain information on Li Yueha. Therefore, before Kong Qingming and the others set off this time, Emily had already asked Li Yueshan for Li Yueha's body's data, and then quickly formulated a medicine for him to temporarily save his life. After drinking the medicine, Kong Qingming immediately asked someone to remove the wires on Li Yueha's body. It was unknown if the mysterious person had done something behind the scenes, but after these devices were removed, they did not sound an alarm. Very soon, they successfully brought Li Yueha out. Moreover, there was no risk in the path of retreat, so they left smoothly just like that. After leaving the research institute, Kong Qingming still felt a little confused. He felt that their mission this time was too. He didn't know how to describe it, but it felt a little abnormal. Was this a dream? Until they left the Wuxia base early, they met Elmar who came to meet them. Kong Qingming and the others still had a feeling that it was unreal. He hit me. He couldn't help but say to his teammate next to him. Pa! His teammate unceremoniously slapped the back of his head. Hiss! It hurts. Do you have to hit me so hard? Kong Qingming held the back of his head and cried out in pain. The teammate said, and it's more real if it hurts a little. Kong Qingming was stunned speechless. Elmar looked at them in confusion. Ha! Why did you come out early? Didn't we agree to meet inside? Could it be that Plan A failed? Seeing that they came out early, Elmar could only think that their mission might have failed. It didn't fail. Look over there. Kong Qingming immediately put down his hand when he heard her question and pointed at Li Yueha, who was carried on the shoulder of a strong team member. Huh. Elmar was even more confused. Wasn't this much earlier than they had planned? And they had succeeded. Unable to react, Elmar turned her head and stared at Li Yueha. She asked with some uncertainty. No, how did you guys get here so fast? Because there are no more obstacles. Without waiting for Kong Qingming to answer, the team member, who slapped the back of his captain's head, spoke first. Elmar looked at him in confusion. What do you mean? Well, it's a long story. Let's go. Let's find a place to hide first, and then I'll explain to you. Kong Qingming had an indescribable expression on his face. He waved his hand at her and led his men into the car they had hidden before. Elmar was kept in suspense. She curiously chased after him and asked, "Hurry up and tell me." After getting in the car, Kong Qingming told her what had happened. After listening to it, Elmar also had a dumbfounded expression. Ah? So, you really brought him out like this? What's the other party's purpose? Kong Qingming shook his head. I don't know what his purpose is, but we didn't encounter any ambush or difficulties. Although he provided Li Yueha with the medicine to prolong his life in the end, we didn't really let him drink it. Now that we've successfully brought him out, it seems that no one is chasing after us. What that person said should be true. He really wants to hand Li Yueha over to us safely. From the time they left the Wuxia Research Institute to the Wuxia base, they had walked several kilometers, but they still didn't find any pursuers. Obviously, the mysterious person wasn't lying to them. But now they hadn't completely left the Wuxia base, so they couldn't rule out the other party's suspicion. Chapter 1403. Kong Qingming and the rest found a place that wouldn't be easily discovered a dozen kilometers away from China and stopped temporarily. Then he ordered most of his subordinates to send Li Yueha back, while he left 2 people here. He continued to discuss with Elmar about the mission to gather information. Right now, Sikongchen is going crazy in the zombie horde. I think he's angry because his previous plans didn't work. Elmar explained the situation with the zombie horde. She had summoned over 10,000 zombies and mutant beasts to charge over in order to attract Sikong Chen's attention. That way, even if Kong Qingming's actions were exposed, he would have some buffer time. In the end, Sikong Chen's attention was indeed attracted, but Kong Qingming's mission didn't require any effort at all. Instead, he even had the help of a traitor. As for Sikong Chen's side, once he arrived at the charging position of the zombies, he began to bombard the zombies with his fire ability. Of course, the effect of his level 8 ability was also very strong. The fire ability was originally an offensive ability, and his energy had already reached level 8. A random fireball thrown out would have the same effect as a missile, not to mention that the temperature of the flame was extremely high. When it exploded on the ground, it could instantly turn the ground into magma. Elmar didn't expect Sikong Chen to personally come out. She thought that he would at most lure out his subordinates, Wei Haichao or Han Xiao. In the end, she saw Sikong Chen running out. After he ran out, he used all sorts of abilities to bombard the densely packed zombie horde. One look, and you could tell that he was very irritable. Speaking up to this point, Sikong Chen held back his anger. Kong Qingming and the rest laughed and revealed an expression of schadenfreude. Who told him to cause trouble for no reason? He reaped what he sowed. He deserves to die from anger. Then this time, I will mainly go to Sikong Chen's area to investigate his next step. You guys go to other places to investigate. For example, Han Xiao, Wei Haichao, Lu Jinan, and the other directors of the base. They will definitely have information on Sikong Chen's plan. Elmar looked at Kong Qingming and assigned the tasks. She looked at Kong Qingming and asked, "What do you think?" Kong Qingming shook his head. "I have no objections, but you have to be careful. Don't get too close to Sikong Chen. In any case, he's still a rank 8 ability user. Your invisibility skill might not work on him." Understood. Elmar nodded. Then, they began to disperse and sneak into the Wuxia base again to gather intelligence. Sikong Chen quickly led his men to clear out the 10,000 zombies, but he still could not find the rank 2 king zombie that he had promised. He stood on a small hillside, squinting and looking around. Finally, he turned around and asked Wei Haichao, "Where is that level 2 king?" Wei Haichao was also solemnly observing his surroundings. Hearing Sikong Chen's question, he knew that Sikong Chen was unhappy. However, the other party had vented his anger just now, so his tone was a little bad. He turned his head to look around and said with a puzzled expression, "That shouldn't be the case. How come there wasn't even a single level 1 king above level 5 in such a large-scale zombie wave? There must be, or is it hidden somewhere? Without a rank 2 king, there wouldn't be such a large-scale zombie horde." Naturally, Sikong Chen was aware of this situation, but he just wanted to ask about it. "Search carefully. It definitely wouldn't run too far." Sikong Chen coldly ordered him. "Got it. If it hasn't escaped, it definitely won't be able to escape our search." Wei Haichao nodded at him and left in a flash. Although he was quite confident before he left, he felt that he should be able to find some traces of the level 2 king. However, not long after, he circled around a 5-kilometer radius a few times and did not find the aura of the level 2 king. Wei Haichao frowned and looked in the opposite direction of the Wuxia base. Could it be that the level 2 king really left? He was a nature type, and all the plants within a few kilometers of him were his antennae. He could sense the aura within a few kilometers through these plants. However, after circling around a few times, his sensing range expanded along with his movement, but he still could not sense the aura of the level 2 king. Could it be a mutant zombie that can hide its aura? Wei Haichao mumbled to himself, then turned around to see Sikong Chen. When Sikong Chen heard that he could not find the existence of the level 2 king, he did not show any expression of anger. Instead, he looked at him calmly and snorted, "It already ran away, and you're still looking for it." Wei Haichao immediately looked at him with dissatisfaction. "You already knew, and you still asked me to look for it." Sikong Chen did not say anything. He just turned around and disappeared in the direction of the base. Wei Haichao was speechless. On the other side, Elmar sneaked into Sikong Chen's office building using stealth. She went around the busy staff and leaders of the base to find Sikong Chen's office. However, she was not so lucky, because the door was closed. In order to continue gathering information here, she couldn't expose herself prematurely. Therefore, Elmar could only leave and go to other places to investigate. On this side, Elmar and Kong Qingming's mission was still going on. In the base, Lin Xiao was holding the bag of energy cores that Mo Yan gave her, and was working hard to level up the zombie army. While waiting for China's next move, Lin Xiao was increasing the strength of her army in order to cater to China's actions. He didn't expect Sikong Chen to be able to keep his composure and not have anything on him. This also gave her time to level up all the intermediate zombies in the army. From the original 20 to 30 level 1 kings, she had now increased the number of level 1 kings to 70 to 80. At the same time, she also had to go to the West Lake, where the zombies that were previously gathered, and bring back all the level 3 and above zombies. They were thrown into the zombie training base to train. The entire zombie army had recently been added to the wall, and the size of the zombie army had already reached more than 7,000 people. After Elmar went to China, Lin Xiao sent Old Mengua to the military camp to stay. There had to be someone in the training base to suppress the zombies. Although she would occasionally go over to check on the discipline of the zombies, she did not have much time, because she still had to deal with other affairs in the base. These affairs were all reviewed by Lin Feng, and he felt that he needed her approval, so he gave her these tasks. One day, Lin Wenwen came over with the research materials from the second stage. As soon as he came in and saw Lin Xiao sitting at the desk, he suddenly felt dizzy before he could say anything. Chapter 1404. Lin Xiao had already felt Lin Wenwen coming in, so she looked up after she entered the door. Then she saw Lin Wenwen suddenly lowering her head and covering her forehead, stopping at the entrance of the door. What's wrong with her? Lin Xiao couldn't help but look at the two children on the sofa and asked in confusion. Tung Tung and Wu Yueling were playing on the two-seater sofa. At this time, they also turned their heads to look at Lin Wenwen's strange behavior. Hearing Lin Xiao's question, they turned to her and shook their heads. It meant that they didn't know either. Lin Wenwen didn't pay attention to them. Instead, she lowered her head and stood there for a few seconds. Only then did he slowly raise his head. He first waved at the two children and greeted them before walking toward Lin Xiao with a frown. Lin Xiao sat and looked at her. After seeing her come in, her eyes had become clear. She asked again, "What did you see?" After Lin Wenwen came over, she pulled a chair and sat down in front of her table. Then she nodded and put the documents in her hands on her table. She said with a puzzled expression, "Well, I saw some. Wait, let me sort it out first." Lin Xiao reached out to take her documents and asked her curiously, "Tell me what you saw. I will help you sort it out." Lin Wenwen looked up at her and said, "I saw you, but you looked a bit strange. You were attacking our base." Hearing this, Lin Xiao also slightly frowned. "Was it a full zombie form?" Lin Wenwen nodded. "Yes, not only a full zombie form. And your face was covered with black stripes. Do you know what happened?" Since Lin Xiao asked her if all the zombies she saw were zombies, Lin Wenwen felt that she must have realized something. Lin Xiao sighed, looked at the direction of Tung Tung, and said, "Since you can see it, I definitely can't stay up there for too long." "Up there?" Lin Wenwen was a little puzzled by her use of the word, but soon she thought of something. "Are you going to go down to that underground space? And what's with that state of yours?" Lin Xiao looked at her, was silent for a moment and said, "Don't tell anyone about this. My body is not very normal recently. After all, this body is not mine. Its zombie instincts are still there, and it seems to have awakened recently." Lin Wenwen looked at her in a daze for a while before he reacted. His eyes widened slightly as he looked at Lin Xiao and asked hesitantly, "You mean, this is Lu Tianyu's zombie instinct?" Lin Xiao nodded. "It has already come out twice, so I need to find a way to get rid of it later, but now is not the time." After all, Wuxia was now eyeing them covetously. If she didn't stay here at this time, she might suffer heavy losses. Therefore, she had to wait for the matter in Wuxia to pass first, before she could find a place far away from the human base to hide, and find a way to get rid of Lu Tianyu's zombie instincts. Lin Wenwen looked at her worriedly. Can it be removed? This is a kind of instinct, it should be very difficult, right? Because this consciousness form was too mystical. It was like mind control, but it couldn't be seen or touched. It was really hard to deal with. Could it be like a hypnotist? Using an imaginary scene to fight with psychic energy? Or like a holographic game? But thinking about it, this should be a battle of psychic energy. She had never encountered this kind of situation, so she couldn't tell what kind of experience it was, but she was worried. If her sister couldn't control it well, and the consciousness of Lu Tianyu, which had become a zombie, ran out, it would be a big deal. Looking at Lin Wenwen's worried and complicated eyes, Lin Xiao smiled at her. Don't worry, your sister has maintained her sanity and soul. And after the first 2 confrontations, it is not as strong as you think. Her words were very relaxed, and she was just comforting Lin Wenwen. In fact, she could also feel the difference between the first and second appearance of this zombie instinctive consciousness. The second time, the psychic energy in this consciousness was obviously stronger, but she couldn't tell Lin Wenwen this. At this time, Tung Tung, who was sitting on the sofa and playing, suddenly turned his head to look at them and said to Lin Wenwen, Auntie, Mama will be fine. Lin Wenwen turned to look at him with some doubts and asked curiously, Huh? You know about your mother's matter again? Tung Tung Ting nodded, and turned his head to play. It seemed that he didn't intend to answer Lin Wenwen's words. Lin Wenwen saw that the child ignored her after saying one sentence. She turned back to look at Lin Xiao in confusion and said blankly, He doesn't seem to be worried about your situation at all. Why? Lin Xiao shrugged. I don't know, but he seems to know my physical condition better than I do. I probably need his help when the time comes. At this time, Tung Tung sat there and stretched his head to look at Wu Yueling's painting. He said loudly without turning his head, When the time comes, Mama, put me under the bottom of your space lake. Can't the 2 of us beat it? Lin Wenwen looked back at him in amazement, then turned back to look at Lin Xiao. You can do this? As a result, Lin Xiao tilted her head and looked at Tung Tung with a confused face. Son, can you do this? Tung Tung turned his back to them and said calmly, Yes. So don't worry. Lin Wenwen turned her head to look at him in confusion, then turned back to Lin Xiao and said, Where does he get his confidence from? Lin Xiao smiled. If he says there's no problem, then there shouldn't be too much of a problem. After all, if it weren't for him, your sister would have really disappeared 2 years ago. Lin Wenwen. Speaking of 2 years ago, it was naturally the matter of Lin Xiao's death. Thinking of everyone's mood at that time, Lin Wenwen's expression was a little depressed. However, she quickly sorted out her emotions and discovered something extraordinary. Huh. Is it because of him that you were reborn into this zombie's body? Lin Xiao nodded. In fact, this space I am in now is his, but at that time, he was still in my stomach and hadn't formed yet. But I don't know what kind of chemical reaction it was. When I self-destructed, he suddenly activated this space ability, and then absorbed both of our spiritual consciousnesses. Then he randomly ran into Lu Tianyu's body that had just died. Lin Wenwen's expression continued to maintain a look of wonder, and her small mouth was slightly open. After a while she reacted, Wow, so awesome? When he was still an embryo, he could already do this to protect you to this extent. This little brat used to have this kind of awesome ability. Chapter 1405. Lin Xiao looked at shouting with a smile, and then said to Lin Wenwen. He remembered those things when he was born some time ago. Just like me, he didn't remember anything when he came here at the beginning. Lin Wenwen said with a smile. At that time, he not only didn't remember, but also grew into a big vine. Lin Xiao opened the document she brought and changed the topic. Well, let's not talk about my situation. Anyway, since you have seen it, I have to speed up the pace. I really need to hurry up and get rid of Sikongchen as soon as possible. Then I can deal with Lu Tianyu, who is restless even after turning into a zombie. She hoped that when she was dealing with Sikongchen, Lu Tianyu would come out to make trouble. How do you want to deal with Xigongchen? Lin Wenwen looked at her and asked. He hasn't made any movement yet. I don't know how he is going to deal with High City. Lin Xiao glanced at him lightly. Who said that I have to wait for him? If you want to kill him quickly, you can only use the old way. Lin Wenwen looked at her with confusion for a while. What old way? Remember how the bases in Dilong and Hidden Cloud City were dealt with? Lin Xiao said lightly. Lin Wenwen's eyes brightened when he heard it. He immediately understood what she meant. You mean beheading? She knew that Lin Xiao didn't intend to deal with the people in Wuxia City. So she could only deal with the army, or those leaders who wanted to make trouble. But the next second, Lin Wenwen's expression changed into confusion. But Xigongchen is also at level 8. It's not so easy to kill him, right? Although you are at the same level as him, you will be more powerful. But if he wants to run, can you stop him? You can't kill him at once, right? Lin Xiao looked calm. I will make it too late for him to escape. She pulled him into the space, and he could run however he wanted. Anyway, no matter how he ran, he couldn't escape the end of being killed by her. Anyway, it was not the first time to kill a level 8. If she hadn't been busy figuring out these underground creatures before, she would have used this method to deal with him. Originally, she wanted to study these underground creatures and the situation of this underground space by herself, and then let Wu Qingyue deal with Xigongchen. Also, when she was in the base, she wasn't worried that Xigongli would continue to send people to cause trouble. But now if she wanted to leave the base, there would be a bunch of people and a bunch of zombies in the base. Although there were a lot of level 7 zombies here, she did not forget that Xigongchen still had some medicine that could suddenly increase the strength of his ability. She was also sure that the current level 7 and 8 ability users in Wuxia were not the ones on the surface. Although Xigongchen was only a level 8 ability user on the surface, he dared to have such a bold idea of attacking Haicheng. Obviously, his trump cards were not limited to advanced weapons. Although zombies had the upper hand when fighting against metahumans, they could not fight against those of a higher level. China's strength-enhancing potion seemed to be able to increase one's strength level. Furthermore, China was so big. Among the 2 million people, there were many who were strong but dissatisfied with Xigongchen's tyrannical management. If he could get rid of Xigongchen, he would be able to draw out all the hidden forces behind him. At that time, Wuxia would definitely be in chaos, and then it would have nothing to do with the base. Lin Wenwen saw that she was so sure of her strength and asked her, "Since you think you can kill him, why didn't you do it before? Why did you wait until now to deal with him?" Lin Xiao used her chin to point at the document in her hand and said, "Wasn't it because we were in a hurry to deal with these underground creatures?" Lin Wenwen said, "Oh. But this Wuxia is really good at stirring up trouble. If they have nothing to do, they would run to the underground to cause trouble. Now that they have caused trouble, they don't even care about it. In the end, they only think about dealing with other human bases. I don't know what the Wuxia people are thinking. Speaking of which, the other bases didn't provoke them." She then continued to say, "When some people become strong, their ambitions will expand. They want to use power to control the world. The desire to control is also a kind of bad habit of humans. It's just that the apocalypse has strengthened this bad habit. It's very normal." Lin Xiao was not as confused as she was. "Oh." Lin Wenwen could only reply speechlessly. And to be honest, the disaster of the underground creatures was caused by them. Now there's another reason to deal with them. At this time, Lin Xiao's eyes suddenly turned cold and said, "The news said that the underground creatures might all finish advancing in 3 days. And after they advance, even if the Wuxia people don't do anything, they will still go crazy. And after they advance, even if the Wuxia people don't do anything, they will still go crazy. Just that the degree of madness won't be as crazy as after they use the drug." Lin Wenwen said at this time, and then asked her, "When do you plan to deal with Xigongchen?" Lin Xiao thought for a moment and then said, "I'll leave tomorrow. And going to China isn't just to deal with Xigongchen, who doesn't know how to cause trouble. It's just that our goals are different." With that said, the corner of her mouth curled up into a smile. This smile was different from her usual smile, cold smile and warm smile. Instead, it had a murderous aura. Although it was a different face, Lin Wenwen could still see the familiar expression in her sister's smile. Anyway, since young, whenever she smiled like this, someone would be in big trouble. Leave tomorrow? How many days do you plan to come back? What about those underground creatures that have advanced? Lin Wenwen continued to ask her. Lin Xiao said, depending on the situation, at least 5 days. At most, it will be 9 to 10 days. I should be able to come back in time. But even if I come back, I can't continue to deal with these underground creatures with you. I will think of a way to rob the weapons that can effectively attack these underground creatures from Wuxia. Lin Wenwen was speechless. She suddenly felt that her sister's main goal this time was to steal those weapons from Wuxia, because their own base didn't have very powerful weapons to defend against these underground creatures. Although they had the catnip bullets made in Haicheng, Lin Wenwen didn't have enough catnip bullets to make large weapons. They could only make small bullets and cannonballs in batches. Therefore, they were still useful against small groups of underground creatures. But if there was a wave of underground creatures, they definitely wouldn't be able to withstand it. Lin Xiao looked at her expression and knew what she was thinking. She said calmly, anyway, it's a waste not to use them. This is caused by those people from Wuxia, so it's normal to use their weapons to solve it. Chapter 1406. To Lin Xiao, since it was China's doing, it was only right for them to take their weapons. Although this take was taking without asking. To put it bluntly, it would be called stealing. But Lin Wenwen felt that what she said made sense. But she quickly thought of something else. Then does my brother-in-law know about your body's condition? Lin Xiao felt a bit uncomfortable when she heard her call her that. Her relationship with Wu Qingyue was a bit complicated. They hadn't even announced their relationship yet, so it was a bit early to call him that. She suppressed the strange feeling in her heart and said, he knows about my body, but he doesn't know that I'm going to cause trouble for Sikongqin. It was because of what he had said before, that the zombie consciousness of this body had been induced, and now she had to fight with this consciousness for the body. Hearing that Wu Qingyue also knew about this, Lin Wenwen felt a bit relieved. Oh, then you're going to deal with this body by yourself. Aren't you going to bring him? Will he feel at ease letting you go alone? What if you fail? Bah, fine, you won't fail. Although Lin Wenwen said that she wasn't worried about Lin Xiao, she was still a bit worried. What if she said that she was going to deal with this zombie consciousness, but she came back as a zombie without a mind? There was always a what if in everything. Because accidents always happened, Lin Xiao could only try her best to give her a guarantee. After talking for a long time, she finally suppressed her worry and sent her away. The next day before dawn, Lin Xiao left with Duan Wan, who was acting as the driver. There were no other people in the car. If the group of zombies in Lin Xiao's space wasn't included, then it was just the two of them on this mission. By the way, why didn't you tell Leader Wu about this mission? Duan Wan sat in the driver's seat and asked. Lin Xiao sat in the passenger seat with her head leaning against the back of the seat. She closed her eyes and crossed her arms in front of her chest. Hearing that, she asked, why should I tell him? What does it have to do with him that I can do it myself? Duan Wan couldn't help but glance at her. Isn't your relationship progressing quite well? Why do you have to keep things a secret from each other? Lin Xiao maintained his original appearance and said, this isn't considered a secret. It's just that I don't need his permission to do things. Is it necessary to report to him every time I do something? Duan Wan thought about it and shook her head. Well, that's not necessary. Even if we are husband and wife, we still have private space. Besides, we haven't really been together in a formal way. Although Lin Xiao already had a choice in her heart, she felt that it was not the time to say it. Last time, it was completely because of the zombie instincts of this body that it said those overbearing words to Wu Qingyue. Duan Wan glanced at her speechlessly. "Ayo, big sister. How long are you going to keep acting coy? Since you're starting to have feelings for him, and Leader Wu is also sincere towards you, you're not going to let him off easily. I see that the two of you don't seem to be too hard to match. You're still not willing to open the last shell in your heart. Duanwan knew about Lin Xiao's love history. Therefore, as soon as he heard Lin Xiao's attitude, he immediately guessed the fundamental reason. Speaking of which, these two people had been entangled for more than a year, almost 2 years. Fortunately, Wu Qingyue was still very patient. He had always been the one attacking, and his big sister had always been hiding. She had even given birth to a child, but she was still hiding. My matter is easy to deal with, what about you? If you don't find someone, you're not young anymore. At this time, Lin Xiao finally couldn't help but open her eyes. After glancing at her, she directly changed the topic. Duanwan. Inexplicably, she felt that she was being rude. Moreover, she was defeated by the words "not young anymore" from Lin Xiao. Compared to Lin Xiao's current body, that was only in her 20s, and it was still a frozen zombie body. She was in her 30s, so she really wasn't young anymore. Even if she didn't look that old, her real age was right there. Thinking about how this Lin Xiao used to be the same age as her, and now that she had changed into a younger body, it hurt. I haven't found someone that I like. Duanwan, who was stabbed by her actual age, stared straight ahead and focused on driving. She said helplessly. Lin Xiao shrugged. If you don't like someone, you'll enter the stage of a middle-aged big sister. Duanwan. She really didn't want to talk to her. Along the way, they quickly arrived near Wuxia. Lin Xiao asked Duanwan to stay outside and guard while she sneaked in with her stealth. It wasn't about numbers, she alone was enough. After sneaking into the Wuxia base, she didn't rush to find Sikongchen. Instead, she moved in the direction where Elmar was. And after 10 minutes, she found the rooftop where Elmar was hiding. There was no shadow around the rooftop, but Lin Xiao could sense where Elmar's aura was. She walked over to a corner of the wall and stood still next to it. She looked at the cement stones that had fallen off from the wall. Suddenly, she kicked a cement stone that was slightly smaller than a fist. The cement stone flew a short distance and then fell to the ground. Elmar, who was hiding and leaning against the wall, suddenly turned her head and looked at the rolling cement stone. Then, she heard her leader's voice beside her. I was afraid of scaring you, so I used the stone to attract your attention. Elmar immediately showed herself and looked in the direction of the voice. Lin Xiao had also shown herself. She stood beside her and nodded at her. Although the two of them had removed their stealth state, they still concealed their auras very tightly to avoid being discovered by Sikongchen or other enemies. Why did you suddenly come here? Elmar looked at her in confusion. Lin Xiao asked her, do you know what Sikongchen is planning to do next? Elmar nodded. I have a rough idea. He seems to be planning to attack directly. Right now, he's gathering the attack force and ability users. But he hasn't set off immediately. Lin Xiao asked thoughtfully. He's not planning to set off immediately? Is he waiting for an opportunity? Elmar nodded again. That's right. He said that after all the subterranean creatures advanced to far level, these subterranean creatures might start a natural riot. Then he wanted to think of a way to lure these rioting subterranean creatures to the vicinity of other human bases. Then, he will take this opportunity to attack Haiqing in our base. Lin Xiao laughed coldly. He thought of a plan so quickly. But this time, I'm here to ruin his plan for the second time. Hearing this, Elmar looked at her and thought for a moment before saying, as soon as I saw you, I knew you were here to cause trouble again. What do you want to do this time? Lin Xiao said coldly, to kill Sikongchen. Chapter 1407. Hearing Lin Xiao suddenly say that she wanted to kill Sikongchen, Elmar was a little stunned. She was stunned for a moment before she reacted. Huh? Why did you suddenly think of killing Sikongchen? Lin Xiao looked at her and didn't say the reason. She only said, I suddenly feel that this can quickly solve the problem in Wuxia. It's not a good idea to be watched all the time. Elmar looked at her speechlessly. Then why didn't you kill Sikongchen when you came to destroy their secret research base? Lin Xiao looked at her in silence for a few seconds before saying, you didn't think of it back then, did you? Yes, at that time, she was indeed thinking about the underground space and the underground creatures that were everywhere on the surface. However, it wasn't that she didn't think of killing Sikongchen directly, but she didn't have the motivation to do so previously. At that time, she thought that if Sikongchen didn't go all out, other small tricks wouldn't be a problem. It was only now that she realized that there was something wrong with her body, and was a little anxious that she suddenly thought of it. If she left to solve her own problem, she didn't know how long it would take for her to complete it. Another reason was that she had a feeling that if Wuxia was really serious, Wu Qingyue might not have time to care about her base when dealing with Wuxia. Therefore, Lin Xiao had to think of a way to solve Huaxia's problem before leaving to solve her own problem. Otherwise, she would leave the current situation without any hesitation. She didn't know what kind of treatment the base with only 20 to 30,000 people would receive. However, she wouldn't tell Elmar about this. After all, it was a little troublesome to explain. Your memory, could it be that it's a side effect of amnesia? Elmar rolled her eyes at her. Lin Xiao. She couldn't refute. All right, let's not talk about this. By the way, do you know where they keep the new weapons to deal with the underground beasts? She quickly changed the topic and asked. Elmar thought for a moment before nodding and saying, yes, I have some clues. However, I haven't investigated in detail yet, so I have to find someone to ask. Lin Xiao knew that she was going to find the spies that Xie Dong had set up here. Why don't you wait here for a while? I'll go ask around first. Elmar looked at Lin Xiao and said. Lin Xiao nodded. Go, but I won't wait for you. While you're out scouting, I'll go take care of that scourge, Sikongchen. Then wait for me here. I'll come back when I'm done. Elmar answered okay. Let's begin. After saying that, Lin Xiao turned around and disappeared. Elmar disappeared as well. On the other side, Sikongchen was in his office, frowning as he flipped through a pile of documents on his desk. Not only was there a pile of documents on his desk, but there were also all sorts of documents on the coffee table beside the sofa. Wei Haichao, Sikongchen's secretary, and Sikongchen's assistant sat on the sofa and flipped through the documents in their hands. Although you have a backup of the files here, are the stolen information really fine? It must be that woman from the Universal Base who took it. Will she use this matter to expose us? Wei Haichao asked Sikongchen without raising his head, as he looked at the documents with his head lowered. So what? Even if the situation in this underground space was caused by Old Bai, it wasn't intentional. It was just a mistake. And aren't we also studying how to deal with these things? This can be considered a remedy. On the contrary, it was that woman who destroyed our research base. It's not our fault. Sikongchen calmly pushed all the blame to Lin Xiao. Wei Haichao raised his eyebrows and nodded. Well, that's true. This method is also possible. Don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and investigate. Sikongchen threw the documents in his hand on the table, then stood up and walked out of the office. Wei Haichao sighed and said to himself, why do we have to investigate this? Wouldn't it be clear if we asked the researchers in the base? At least they know better than us. His assistant said weakly. The leader suspects that there are spies among those people. Because the last time the plan was leaked, he doesn't trust others anymore. The last time the plan was leaked, it was his own fault. Wei Haichao said lightly. Boss, don't talk nonsense. He won't be happy if he hears it. Wei Haichao's assistant shushed him. Because the medicine they were going to use on the underground exotic beasts was destroyed by Lin Xiao in the underground base. Originally, this medicine was in the hands of Professor Bai. Sikongchen didn't have it. Now that they had used it, they could only find new information and make another batch. That was why they were looking for backup information here, because the original information had been emptied. When Lin Xiao followed Sikongchen's scent to find him, Sikongchen was standing by the window at the end of the corridor on the roof, smoking. Sikongchen was thinking that since he couldn't spread the virus in Sea City this time, he would make those underground exotic beasts even crazier. When that time came, they would all rush out of Sea City and attack it like a tide. He wanted to see how Wu Chengyue was going to resist these underground exotic beasts. Do they think these underground exotic beasts won't attack humans without their guidance? That's impossible. Once all the promotions were over, those high-level underground exotic beasts would bring the newly promoted underground exotic beasts and set off in the direction of humans. This was something that Sikong Chun had discovered during his research these few days. Something that he didn't know about before. Professor Bai probably knew about it, but he didn't tell him about it. Thinking about it, even if his previous plan was seen through, it didn't seem to matter much. Sikong Chun smoked an expired cigarette as he imagined the scene of a one-sided attack on Sea City. His eyes couldn't help but reveal a confident and proud look. Lin Xiao watched from the side for a long time. She couldn't sense the thoughts of the rank 8 ability user, but from the other party's expression and eyes, she could guess that Sikong Chun was imagining something to be proud of. It was probably about the attack on Sea City. Judging from his smug expression, it was probably about the attack. Looking at his proud expression, it was obvious that he had a lot of confidence in defeating Wu Chungyue. At this moment, Sikong Chun suddenly turned his head and looked around. There was a faint look of vigilance in his eyes. Lin Xiao quickly looked away and shifted her gaze slightly to the side. This Sikong Chun could actually sense her. As expected, she needed to be more careful. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.